In the Highland, the A9 is closed in both directions south of the A96 Ravenmore interchange at Inverness for an investigation. On the M1 in West Yorkshire, the lane closed northbound between junctions 41 and 42 towards the M62 where someone's broken down, causing delays. And the northbound entry slip road's closed where a lorry's broken down at junction 41 at Cargate with queues towards there. On the M61 in Lancashire, there's a lane closed northbound after an accident between junction 9 for the M65 and the M6 causing queues. On the M1 in Nottinghamshire, 2 lanes are closed southbound after an accident between junctions 26 and 25 from the A610 to the A52 causing queues. The M40 in Warwickshire is closed northbound from junction 12 at Gaydon to 14 at Leamington after an accident with long delays each way towards there and as you divert. On the M4 in London, 3 lanes are closed eastbound at junction 3 at Heston after an accident with queues from junction 4 at Heathrow. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
What prompted you to go on your incredible journey?
Well, I was fighting my own demons at the time, before I started the walk, and it had been a long journey, if you like. And, I knew that I needed to make a change, and my daughter had just flown the nest. I was a single parent before this, and previous to that, I was ex-parachute regiment. And I knew that I needed to make a change because if I didn't, I'm not sure where I would have been now, if that makes sense. So, something just came into my head at the very end of July and said, look, go and walk the UK coastline. And that's exactly what I did. And 6 years later, we've just finished.
You met your missus on the journey as well, didn't you? So truly, Chris, a transformative journey for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, you step into the unknown like that, you have no idea how things are going to work out. You go out with so little expectation, but only really with the aim to, for me personally, to come back feeling a lot better than what I was before I left. And that certainly succeeded. So everything that happened along that journey was one big learning curve. And I got to learn a lot about myself, a lot about, the public and people. And it was just a life-changing transformation for me. And, I learned so much, and I know what I want to do with the rest of my life as a result of it. And I met the most amazing people, and I worked hard. 6 years of carrying your house on your back isn't the easiest feat in the world. I can promise you that, but it was worth every single step because, I rescued a dog along the way. I met my now fiance, Kate Barron, along the way, and we had a baby together along the way as well. So to start in the position that I did, and then end up with all of that coming over the line with me was just something that I never expected. And I couldn't have dreamed it up, to be honest.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Morning, 9:30 on Thursday, the 12th of September. Live across the UK, this is Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So the NHS is in crisis. You probably knew that already. Lord Darcy's independent investigation has concluded the NHS is in a critical condition.
But the vital signs are normal, which will suggest that we can do something about this. To do it well, we need to engage the whole staff, patients, the public, the political leadership, all aligned to make that change happen as quickly as we can, because we can.
And the Prime Minister is set to make a speech on what he says is the biggest reimagining of the NHS since its inception in 1948.
Labour's renters' rights changes are set to include a ban on no-fault evictions and brakes on in-tenancy rent rises in England. What do you think about that?
And what about this? Prisoners can now jump the queue, says the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who says with a big housing shortage in the capital, recent released prisoners should be given priority to help them from reoffending. Does he indeed?
Rachel Reeves' budget, the latest economic figures, Tata Steel investment to save jobs and Amazon's £500 million investment. Is Labour going to create a growing economy?
And the Sovereign's Parade. The Prince of Wales will attend the parade on behalf of the King at the Royal Air Force College in Cranwell today.
And is it Mrs Doubtfire or Mrs Windsor? Can you guess who this is meant to be? That's Prince Philip on the right, there's your clue. It's been dividing opinions and reviews have plainly said it is not very good. What do you think?
Yuck's what I think. And Willanthropy, they call it. Charities across the UK are celebrating a groundbreaking increase in charitable gifts in wills. We call it Willanthropy. We're going to be joined by the legendary TV personality and Strictly star, Debbie McGee.
a bit mean on the sculptor.
I don't.
Oh,
It's terrible.
come on.
It is
Imagine.
absolutely terrible. When I saw her, I had to look twice, 3 times. The giveaway is the overweight dog by her feet, which is presumably meant to be a corgi. And Philip looks sort of like Prince Philip. I wish he was around, because you can imagine what he'd have said to the Queen about it.
You know what?
He'd have seen the funny side of it.
That was meant to be the highlight of that sculptor's career. I feel for them.
I don't.
She looks a bit like Hyacinth Bouquet.
She does.
Mrs. Doubtfire. Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbnews.com/your say. First, the very latest news with Sam Francis.
Bev, Andrew, thank you very much and good morning to you. It's just after 9:30. The top story this morning, the Prime Minister is warning the NHS is at a fork in the road and says it must reform or die. It comes as a damning report finds the health service is in serious trouble. Lord Darcy's rapid review highlights rising demand, low productivity and poor morale, just some of the major challenges facing the NHS. Sir Keir Starmer's set to unveil a 10-year plan today, focusing on cutting waiting times, improving community services and shifting healthcare to a digital future. He blames Conservative policies for the current crisis, calling their failings unforgivable. 6 aid workers with the United Nations Refugee Agency have been killed in 2 airstrikes on a school in Gaza, marking the highest death toll among UN staff in a single incident. One of those killed was a manager of a UN shelter that housed around 12,000 displaced people, mostly women and children. The school has now been hit 5 times since the war began. It erupted following a Hamas-led attack on Israel on the 7th of October that killed 1,200 people and 250 abducted. Here, data centres will be classified as critical national infrastructure to protect against cyber attacks and IT blackouts, the government's announced. The facilities store vital data from NHS records to smartphone photos and financial information. Their new status puts data centres on par with water, energy and other emergency services. And the move coincides with a proposed multi-billion-pound investment in Hertfordshire to build Europe's largest data centre, creating over 700 local jobs. And Amazon has also pledged to invest £8 billion in UK data centres over the next 5 years. Well, history is in the making today, hopefully, that is, as the Polaris Dawn crew attempt the first ever spacewalk by a non-professional group of astronauts. Commander and billionaire Jared Isaacman and crewmate Sarah Gillis will leave their modified SpaceX Dragon capsule without the usual safety of an airlock 400 miles above the Earth. They'll rely on experimental spacesuits and life support hoses to perform critical tests in the vacuum of space. The mission is privately funded and Isaacman says the risks are worth it to advance space exploration. Excuse me. And finally, Mr Bates versus the Post Office continues to rake in awards, winning Best New Drama at the National Television Awards last night. The ITV mini-series revisits the Horizon IT scandal, where over 700 sub-postmasters were wrongly convicted because of a flawed IT system. Toby Jones, who plays Sir Alan Bates, claimed Best Drama Performance for his portrayal of the real-life whistleblower. And Joe Hamilton, a former sub-postmastress, slammed the government for delaying compensation for the victims, saying over half of them remain unpaid.
I went to Westminster a couple of weeks back and saw the new minister, and trust me, nothing has changed. It's true. And almost all of these people behind me haven't been paid yet. Including Sir Alan Bates. They've offered him 30% of his claim.
Those are the latest headlines from the newsroom for now. A full roundup at 10 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Very good morning. It's 9:36. This is Britain's newsroom live across the UK on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very rare, actually, that every front page, Bev, has the same story on it. Thousands dying due to NHS delays, Labour orders biggest NHS reform in history, NHS reform will die, says Bev. This is the report by Lord Darcy, who is a consultant surgeon, which he's done in 9 weeks, ordered by the new government, and which says the NHS is dire and in critical condition. I think we knew that.
Well, I think we did. I know that you're concerned that this was done quite quickly, this 9 weeks. I quite like the fact that it was done quite quickly, because I am sick of reports and inquiries taking years. It's found that failings in care has led to the deaths of thousands of patients
14,000
every year.
14,000. That's a lot.
Big picture finding is the NHS is in a serious, critical condition. But the vital signs are normal, which will suggest that we can do something about this. To do it well, we need to engage the whole staff, patients, the public, the political leadership, all aligned to make that change happen as quickly as we can, because we.
So that is Lord Darcy there. It's his report. As you say, he used to be
He was an academic surgeon. He holds the Paul Hamlin Chair of Surgery at Imperial College. He's an incredibly clever surgeon. He was a junior health minister in the Brown government for a couple of years. He was in the Labour Party. He's not party-pre. In fact, he quit the Labour Party over the disgusting levels of anti-Semitism in Labour under Jeremy Corbyn. And he does. And the reason he's not doing many interviews, he doesn't want to get drawn into a political football, because, of course, Labour are using this to attack the Tories. Of course they are.
Of course they are. Well, Sir Keir Starmer is set to make a speech later on this morning. We're going to be taking as much of that as we can cope with a little later on. He's going to talk about the fact that funding will be moved away from what he calls unproductive hospitals, but will insist that taxes will not be raised to provide more funding.
Well, let's talk to health writer and commentator and former NHS Trust Chairman Roy Lilly, who's well known to this programme. Roy, morning to you. When you read Darcy knows his stuff. He's been working in the NHS for a long time. You've worked in the NHS for a long time. He's in my view, very clear on the problems of the NHS, but I'm not sure that there's the great solution. More prevention, which sounds to me a bit nanny state, but also shifting resources from hospitals to primary care and getting more out of our surgeons, because he says that we get 12% fewer operations per surgeon than we did 5 years ago. How do you get more productivity out of an NHS, Roy?
You shout and make them work harder.
Yeah.
Look, this report, it's a very good report, actually. I know you've got reservations about how quickly it was produced. To be honest, anybody who knows anything about the NHS could have produced this in half the time. I mean, it's all well-trodden territory. It's well produced. It's got a good narrative. It's got lots of graphs and stuff in for the bobble hats. It's a good report. And you're right. I mean, he highlights all of the difficulties. And the question now is, OK, well, we've got the report. What happens next? The Prime Minister's going to be talking this morning. He's saying that it's going to take 10 years to fix the NHS. There's going to be a 10-year plan, and that'll be ready by sometime next year. I mean, Andrew, I think the thing is here that the problems the NHS got are urgent. There are 7.6 million people on the waiting list. People are dying waiting for treatment. We need an urgent, big push on waiting lists. The other major problem, of course, is in social care. About 13% of people in beds in NHS hospitals now don't need to be there, but they can't get home because there's no social care to support them. And there's no whiff of a plan to sort out social care. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm the cynic in me says that this report is bought Starmer time until he can figure out what he's going to do. And Darcy's clear about it. He's saying he doesn't need more revenues. The actual revenue stream has improved and increased. What's missing is the capital. We haven't invested enough in kit. We haven't bought enough stuff. There's £12 billion worth of outstanding repairs in hospitals as it stands at the moment, and we haven't invested in enough modern equipment. Well, we've got a government now that's saying we haven't got enough money to pay winter fuel allowance for your granny. Well, how are they going to fund the hospitals to look after her when she succumbs to cold weather? I mean, they have got to find some capital somewhere to try and get the NHS back up on its feet.
One of the things that shouts out at me as well, Roy, in the report is how far we've fallen behind in cancer care and prevention. Shocking, actually. We're one of the richest countries in the world, and yet we are falling way behind other countries.
Yeah, and I remember the time when we were number one in the European list of cancer outcomes. What has happened, and Darcy makes it clear, there've been three things. There's been the austerity after the world banking crisis. The NHS has had about a 1% uplift for over 10 years, from about 2010 to 2020. That's really what broke the back of the NHS. That's why we've got the real problems. Secondly, of course, COVID made a huge difference. And, you know, the government threw money at it, but it was chaotic. But just before that, we had the Andrew Langley reforms, which upended everything. And everybody in the NHS said, please don't do these reforms. And David Cameron actually nearly stopped it happening. And in his memoirs, he says he wished he'd had. But the Langley reforms did a lot of damage to the structures of the NHS. So it's those three things. And during that period, that's when we fell behind. I mean, I remember when the Commonwealth Fund, which is a big American think tank, did its two-yearly, biannually appraisal of world healthcare systems. For 2 years running, we were the top. Now we're down about number 7. So that's the damage that's been done, and that's what we've got to try and find a way around.
The report does also say that it has to be a collective decision of the country to save the NHS. I'm actually talking, I find it quite refreshing, about personal responsibility for your own health as well, not being too fat, not smoking, not drinking too much, getting some exercise. Wes Streeting, Health Secretary, was on an alternative media source this morning saying that he is ruling out any sort of sugar tax on the big corporations. So what do we do about that, Roy, unless the government are going to start making some tough decisions on the huge corporations which are making people fat?
Yes. Look, it's 60% of first presentations in the NHS are lifestyle-related issues. So it is a big problem. It's what we eat, it's our exercise, it's where we live, the air we breathe, the safety of our streets. All of that, it's all about the lives we lead. If you want to fix that, you have to reform government. You can't reform the NHS and fix any of that. These are big decisions for government. And if you look at, for example, the sugar tax that George Osborne introduced for our kids' sugary drinks, that really worked. He said to the drinks manufacturers, look, you can carry on making sugary drinks if you want to, but we're going to put a whacking tax on them. If you reformulate them, make them taste the same with less sugar, we won't tax them. Guess what they did? They reformulated their drinks. And you can do that now with packaged food. I mean, some of the packaged food is horrendously fattening. You have to take on these big vested interests. Tony Blair took the smoking industry on, and now we've got smoke-free environments, and we all feel a lot better for it. So it does take courageous government, to courageous political leadership to take these things on. You won't fix the NHS unless you stop people getting sick in the first place.
Just finally, Roy, he also mentions Ozempic and says that a drug like Ozempic can be used, again, in prevention, because we know it's a huge help with obesity, and obesity is the big ticking time bomb in the NHS. Yeah,
I mean, there are some exceptions, but fundamentally, obesity is a lifestyle-related issue. People eating the wrong stuff and not being able to exercise, and it's a cycle of decline, and the whole thing just gets worse. I mean, there are people who say, why should we spend money on, making fat people thin? Why can't they do it themselves? Well, the fact is they can't. It's costing the NHS a fortune, and if there is a drug, frankly, it's a cheap way out.
Absolutely.
OK, thank you so much.
Former NHS Trust Chairman. Interesting, isn't it? I mean,
yes, so interesting.
It is an interesting report, but and it's interesting that he just says, which will shut up a lot of these Labour lot. It's not about more money.
Yeah, that's
because they've been chucking billions into this organisation, and it's disappearing. The one thing, of course, the report doesn't mention about productivity and outcomes. How many strikes did we have in the last 12 months? Thanks to the BMA.
That didn't help the productivity,
Hospitals, hospital doctors, junior doctors, GPs are now withdrawing their labour. Doesn't help.
And I want Keir Starmer to come out. No politician ever really comes out and talks about people trying to look after their own health first and foremost, does he? That they always shy away from that a little bit, don't they? We're not really allowed to say people are fat. Not really allowed to say that, are we? We're just going to say the NHS will be there to mop you up when everything goes wrong. Well, as we can see, it's not working. Somehow, it's not easy, but we have to all get fitter and healthier.
Up next, you're probably outraged about all the prisoners who were released early this week, waving their Pemain as they were. Well, now the Mayor of London's come up with another brilliant idea about prisons, which I think is going to make your blood boil. Stay tuned.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
EasyJet is launching a new recruitment drive focused on attracting cabin crew members over 50 and those even considering retirement.
Well, the initiative is called Returnships and is inspired by research that suggests that 75% of people over 50 years old believe that now is the ideal time to embark on a new career.
Joining us now to discuss what it takes to embark on a second career as cabin crew is Helen Williams. Good morning, Helen.
Hi, good morning, Helen.
Welcome. Just touching down in our studio.
It is. I've had a few days off and now I'm here.
So you are now cabin crew.
I am.
What inspired you to get into it? What did you do before? How did it all come around?
Oh, so when I graduated, I took an office job with my grad scheme, and that job lasted 6 months, and I started working for a European carrier. I did just over 5 years at that European carrier and had an absolutely fabulous time. I then went on to a wet lease operation with an Irish carrier and another mainline UK carrier. I then decided to have time out. I had a business, I had a family, I had children, and last autumn I decided, why not? Let's go back and do it all again. So returning to that European carrier that I'd worked at when I was in my early 20s.
And what is that like for you now, returning that bit older, having that life experience, having your children? Do you think that's been a benefit to you?
It's absolutely been a benefit. I mean, the amount of parents that thank me for helping me with their small children when they're crying on a flight. I am that person now.
When you went back for a second time,
Yeah.
did you notice more sort of older people amongst your sort of colleagues?
I did. So when I returned onto my initial course in March of this year, just over half the course were over the age of 30.
Wow.
Which was absolutely phenomenal. And I was expecting to return and be with a lot of younger, 18, 19, 24. I was expecting to be that dinosaur. And that first day of training, to find out that I wasn't the dinosaur, you have no idea how exciting that was. And they've gone on, that particular group, to be phenomenal crew members.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. It's just 9:50. This is Britain's Newsroom with Andrew and Bev. Will you be getting in touch at home? Let's see what you've got to say. I'm not sure whether we've got our next guest here, but anyway, Anthony has said, Bev, the reason we're in this mess is because left-wing ideology has prevented the progressive changes required to maintain standards. Starmer is continuing this trend by giving in to the unions. Spike has said, NHS, do a time and motion study on all of the managers. There is this idea, isn't there, that there's too many managers in the NHS.
Well, there's
Not
far
enough
too many.
officers.
And we're spending £50 million a year on diversity officers. Waste of money. It's one of the most diverse organisations in the world.
It's literally it's got to be the most
Isn't
diverse
it?
organisation in the world. I think I said this on air last week. I'm not sure I did actually. We might have just been chatting in a break. But I went to a hospital recently, just had a routine check-up thing. So I had contact with 7 people. It was a private hospital. First time in my life I've got private healthcare because I don't believe I'll ever get treated on the NHS now. I've kind of given up. And I saw 7 people. 2 of them were British born. So there were 5 people who were all good at their jobs. Everything from Aussies to Germans to French to Afro-Caribbean people, Asian people. And I thought, what do we do in the health service if these immigrants aren't here? I don't know.
Look, we teased you earlier. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, he says housing should be prioritised for, guess what? Newly released prisoners. In other words, they can jump the queue. And remember, this week, 1,600 prisoners were freed under the government's new early release scheme.
So we're joined by former senior prison officer and founder of the fantastic organisation Tempus Novus, Steve Freer. Good morning, Steve. You have been on the top of our list to talk to every day, and I know you've been so busy this week responding to the release of these prisoners. So, first of all, your reflections on these prisoners coming out this week. How will they have got on, and would it help if we follow Sadiq Khan's advice and give them a house first up?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. Yes, it would help because statistically, I think it's 50% less reoffend if they've got suitable accommodation. However, I don't think that's appropriate personally. What they're not telling you is obviously it's okay having accommodation, but they need to be able to pay for that, and they need a lifestyle that supports a healthy future, which is why we give a job, as you know. That's why we work around employment. We're good employers. But as regards the early release scheme itself, I think it's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. I get why. Obviously, prisons are bursting at the seams. They didn't build enough spaces in time. The current government have inherited the problem, so I'm not going to lay the blame at their door. But we've seen this coming now for over a decade, so it's a sad indictment really on government as a whole.
And I think I saw a headline for a tweet actually that you guys put out saying that people have been contacting you ahead of their early release, looking for support. Has that happened?
Yeah. Many of the lads who we support that are due to be released, and now they've been hit with this early release, so they're not as prepared. Many of them have been frustrated because it means that there's less things ready for them when they do get out. And sadly, if they're not in a functional environment, then they do go back to reoffending a lot more often.
Do you think they will in this case then, Steve? Do you have a sort of a sinking heart about this new 1,700 on the streets?
Yes, I don't think, there's clearly going to be more crime, and some of that will be quite devastating. We've already seen examples, I think, even in the last few days. Sadly, this is down to systemic incompetence, really. The probation have been under the cosh for years, and now we're just adding more and more pressure on them.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Another pretty cold feeling day to come for many of us. Still a few showers as well, but also some sunshine, particularly throughout the rest of this morning across eastern areas of England, once again, similar to yesterday morning, in fact, as well as parts of Scotland too. Now, the most frequent showers this morning will be across parts of North Wales. They'll push further inland through the rest of the day into the afternoon, and cloud will bubble up just about everywhere, bringing a risk of showers to most areas, but they'll be most frequent across coastal areas. And if you're exposed to this northerly Arctic wind, you will notice a chill in the air once again. As we head into this evening, though, this northerly wind does slowly start to shift to more of a northeasterly wind. So that means that showers will become more dominant across eastern parts of the country. Eastern areas of northern England seeing quite a few showers, but that does also mean that it will turn drier across western areas, particularly across western Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England, where we've really seen the bulk of the showers for the past couple of days. Still a few showers inland here and there, but for most of us, it should stay fairly dry, though some showers will likely continue across the far north coast of southeastern England overnight tonight. Clearer skies will develop. We've got high pressure building in to end the week, so clear skies quite widely. Temperatures will fall away quite quickly this evening. It's likely to be the coldest start tomorrow morning of the week so far, and temperatures could be as low as around -4 degrees in northern areas, -1 or 2 across some rural areas further south, so potentially a grass frost out there for you on Friday morning, but also quite a lot of sunshine. And Friday is going to be a nice bright day. The sunshine should be much more longer lived through the day compared to the rest of the week, but we will see cloud building in from the northwest. You can see it moving into parts of Northern Ireland here, western Scotland, to end the day on Friday. But ahead of this area of rain, a fine day and temperatures climbing towards the mid to high teens.
that warm feeling inside. From boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be the good luck.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. In the Highland, the A9 is closed each way south of the A96 Raigmore interchange at Inverness for an investigation. On the M61 in Lancashire, there's a lane closed northbound after an accident between junction 9 for the M65 and the M6 causing queues. On the M1 in West Yorkshire, the northbound entry slip road's closed at junction 41 at Cargate, where a lorry's broken down, queues towards there. In Lincolnshire, the A15 is closed at Boothby Grafo because of fallen power cables. On the M1 in Leicestershire, the inside lane's closed northbound after an accident between junctions 24 and 25. Near Nottingham and Derby, it's taking half an hour in the queues. The M40 in Warwickshire is closed northbound from junction 12 at Gaydon to 14 at Leamington after an accident with long delays towards there. On the M4 in London, 3 lanes are closed eastbound at junction 3 at Heston after an accident with queues from junction 4B for the M25. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Very good morning, 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 12th of September, live across the UK. This is Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Well, we knew it, and now it's official. The report from Lord Darcy, an eminent surgeon, says the NHS is in crisis. It's in a critical condition, so how to fix it?
But the vital signs are normal, which will suggest that we can do something about this. To do it well, we need to engage the whole staff, patients, the public, the political leadership, all aligned to make that change happen as quickly as we can. Because
the Prime Minister is set to make a speech on the biggest reimagining of the NHS later this morning. In fact, in about 5 minutes' time.
So stay tuned. And Labour's renters' rights. Changes are set to include a ban on no-fault evictions, brakes on in-tenancy rent rises, and tenants will be able to demand the right to have a pet. What do you think? I can't stand it.
Rachel Reeves' budget, the latest economic figures, Tata Steel investment to save jobs and Amazon's £500 million investment. But is it going to create enough jobs? And are Labour doing enough to create a growing economy?
So, should prisoners jump the queue? The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, says with the big housing shortage in the capital, recently released prisoners should be given priority. In other words, to jump the queue to prevent them from reoffending. That's officially his view.
So, is it the late Her Majesty the Queen, or is it Mrs Doubtfire? Maybe Hyacinth Bouquet? It's a statue, it's in Northern Ireland. We don't think it's particularly good, but you really have a strong opinion, don't you, Andrew?
It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And the dog doesn't look like a corgi either.
Right, Willanthropy charities across the UK are celebrating a groundbreaking increase in charitable gifts left in wills. We're going to be joined by TV personality and Strictly star Debbie McGee. Would you leave your millions to charity?
And we've got the big speech from the Prime Minister on the NHS.
Yeah,
I hope he doesn't devote most of it to slagging off the last 14 years of Tory rule and tells us what he's going to do, because I think we're a bit sick of all this navel-gazing and looking backwards, don't you?
Yeah, very, very much so. We all know the NHS appears to be broken in some areas, in some ways. Some individuals in that service are incredible, and I wouldn't want to undermine the amazing job that some of those life-saving nurses and doctors do. But We need solutions. We need radical change, don't we? GBNews.com/your say. Give us your ideas. First, though, the very latest news with Sam Francis.
Very good morning to you from the newsroom. 2 minutes past 10 now. And the top story this morning, as we've been hearing, the Prime Minister is warning the NHS is at a fork in the road and says it must reform or die. It comes as a damning report has found the health service is in serious trouble. Lord Darcy's rapid review highlights rising demand, low productivity and poor morale, just some of the major challenges facing the NHS. Well, Health Secretary Wes Streeting told us this morning that reform is, he says, the only way to secure the NHS's future.
As a Labour Party, we are not going to get into dewy-eyed nostalgia about what the NHS was when it was created 76 years ago. We are going to face up to the hard choices and challenges today. So the NHS is there for us for the next 76 years, and we deal with the awful situation we see today, where those who can afford it are paying to go private because the NHS isn't there for them, and those who can't afford it are left behind.
Well, in just a few moments, we'll take you live to the Prime Minister in London giving a speech. But in the meantime, the now Shadow Health Secretary Victoria Adkins told us she's concerned by the Labour government's first steps tackling the healthcare crisis.
I'm concerned because the first action of this government was to allow a budget-busting pay rise for junior doctors with no productivity forms attached. And they are also, I hear, going to cancel the productivity plan that I was bringing forward for technology. And if that is what they're doing, then that is of concern because I fear we're in for an even rougher ride.
And staying with the topic of the NHS, just the latest figures into us, in fact, this morning. The size of the waiting list for routine hospital treatment in England was unchanged in July. Following that was 3 consecutive monthly increases, according to the figures out this morning. An estimated 7.62 million treatments were waiting to be carried out the end of July. That list hit a record high in September 2023 with 7.77 million treatments, so just down slightly on that record figure, now standing at 7.62 million treatments waiting to be carried out at the end of July. And as I say, we will take you live to Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister, giving a speech as soon as we have that for you. In the meantime, 6 aid workers with the United Nations Refugee Agency have been killed in 2 airstrikes on a school in Gaza, marking the highest death toll among UN staff in a single incident. One of those killed was the manager of a UN shelter that housed around 12,000 displaced people, mostly women and children. The school has been hit now 5 times since the war began, and it erupted following a Hamas-led attack on Israel on the 7th of October that killed 1,200 people and 250 abducted. Ukraine has called on the UK and the US to lift restrictions on using Western weapons against Russian targets during a visit by the Foreign Secretary and the US Secretary of State yesterday. At a press conference in Kyiv, David Lammy and Antony Blinken praised Ukraine's bravery but avoided committing to President Zelensky's request to use long-range missiles for strikes inside Russian territory. Both leaders, though, did pledge financial support with £600 million from the UK and more than $700 million from the US for humanitarian and energy needs. Discussions will continue in Washington on Friday. Finish what you started. That's the warning to the Prime Minister from a think tank following this summer's nationwide riots. After violent clashes in towns and cities sparked by the deaths of 3 young girls in Southport, Keir Starmer vowed that offenders would face the full force of the law, with over 200 now sentenced. However, British Future, the think tank, says the root cause must be tackled, and they're calling for integration between convicted rioters and community groups to prevent more violence. Experts are calling for a national social cohesion strategy, warning that without it, divisions will deepen. Data centres will be classified as critical national infrastructure to protect against cyber attacks and IT blackouts, the government has announced today. The facilities store vital data from NHS records to smartphone photos and financial information. The new status puts data centres now on par with water, energy and other emergency services, making sure there is greater government support to fend off cyber threats and outages. Well, the move coincides with a proposed multi-billion-pound investment in Hertfordshire to build Europe's largest data centre and will create over 700 local jobs. That comes as Amazon's also pledged to invest £8 billion in UK data centres over the next 5 years. Some space news for you, and history is in the making today, hopefully, as Polaris Dawn crews attempt the first ever spacewalk by non-professional astronauts. Commander and billionaire Jared Isaacman and his crewmate Sarah Gillis will leave their modified SpaceX Dragon capsule without the usual safety of an airlock 400 miles above the Earth. They'll rely on experimental spacesuits and life support hoses to perform critical tests in the vacuum of space. The mission is privately funded, and Isaacman says the risks are worth it to advance space exploration. Mr. Bates versus the Post Office continues to rake in awards, winning Best New Drama last night at the National Television Awards. The ITV miniseries revisits the Horizon IT scandal, where over 700 sub-postmasters were wrongly convicted because of a flawed system. And Toby Jones, who plays Sir Alan Bates, claimed Best Drama Performance for his portrayal of the real-life whistleblower. Well, we'll pull away from that story to take you live now to central London, where the Prime Minister is giving a speech on the state of the NHS.
Come along, but it is really good to come and join you on day 2, and I hear you had a really good day yesterday, and I hope today is just as good as that. As you've heard today, Lord Darcy has published his independent report on the state of our NHS. It is an incredibly comprehensive analysis. Some of you will have seen it. There's copies available. Please read it. It is a raw and honest assessment. That's what we asked for. And that's why I wanted to come here to the King's Fund, home to many of our country's leading healthcare experts, because your contributions are going to be vital as we get this precious institution back on its feet and build an NHS that is truly fit for the future. And look, our starting point couldn't be further from that goal. Public satisfaction in the NHS has fallen from an all-time high when the last Labour government left office to an all-time low today. Think of the impact that has on the staff who put in so much day in, day out, knowing that confidence is at an all-time low. And that's because, as everybody in the country knows, the last government broke the NHS. Until this morning, we didn't know the full scale of the damage, which is laid bare in the report. Even Lord Darcy, with all his years of experience, is shocked by what is discovered. It is unforgivable. And people have every right to be angry. Not just because the NHS is so personal to all of us, or because when people can't get the care they need, they're off work sick, with huge cost to our economy. It's because some of these failings are literally life and death. Take the waiting times in A&E. More than 100,000 infants waited more than 6 hours last year, and nearly a tenth of all patients are now waiting for 12 hours or more. That's not just a source of fear and anxiety. It's leading to thousands of avoidable deaths. And that phrase, avoidable deaths, should always be chilling. That's people's loved ones who could have been saved. Doctors and nurses whose whole vocation is to save them, hampered from doing so. It's devastating, heartbreaking, infuriating. And that's just scratching the surface. High-risk heart attack patients waiting too long for urgent treatment. Cancer diagnosis waiting too long, with cancer death rates higher than in other countries. And when it comes to getting help for mental health, 345,000 are waiting over a year. That's roughly the entire population of Leicester. And look, here's the crucial point. The Tories would have you believe that all of this is because of a once-in-a-generation pandemic. But today's report clearly shows that this is just not true. COVID hit our NHS harder than healthcare systems in other countries, the NHS delayed, cancelled or postponed far more routine care during the pandemic than any comparable health system. And why? Because our NHS went into the pandemic in a much more fragile state. Fewer doctors, fewer nurses, fewer beds than most other high-income health systems. And let's be really clear about what caused that. That ideologically driven top-down reorganisation of 2012 from the former Health Secretary Andrew Lansley, hopelessly misconceived, cost a fortune, and then all had to be reversed. It's what Lord Darcy describes as a calamity without international precedent, a scorched earth approach to health reform, the effects of which are still being felt today. And at the same time, they inflicted what the report describes as the most austere decade since the NH was founded. Crumbling buildings, decrepit porter cabins, mental health patients in Victorian-era cells infested with vermin. When we say they broke the NHS, that's not performative politics. Just look at it. The 2010s were a lost decade for our NHS. A lost decade in which the Conservatives left the NHS unable to be there for patients today and totally unprepared for the challenges and opportunities of tomorrow. And it's not just the state of our National Health Service in crisis. It's also the state of our national health. We're becoming a sicker society, spending more of our lives in ill health than 10 years ago. There are 2.8 million people economically inactive because of long-term sickness. As today's report makes clear, the NHS is not contributing to national prosperity as it could. Getting people back to health and work would not only reduce the costs on the NHS, it would help drive economic growth and fund public services. But perhaps Lord Darcy's most damning finding is about the declining physical and mental health of our children. Fewer children getting vaccinated, while those from the most deprived backgrounds are twice as likely to be obese by reception age. Twice as likely. Much of this is a direct result of wider social injustices, poor quality housing, lower incomes, insecure employment. All of it not just damaging the health of our nation, it's piling up the pressures on our NHS. So that's the report. But look, I haven't come here just to set out this appalling inheritance, though it is really important that we know it and properly understand it in detail. But my Labour government was elected on a mandate for change. So I'm also here to talk about how together we can fix it. I feel very profoundly the responsibility for this, and indeed the opportunity of this moment. The NHS may be broken, but it's not beaten. As the report says, the NHS may be in a critical condition, but its vital signs are strong. And we need to have the courage to deliver long-term reform. Major surgery, not sticking plasters. We've got to face up to the challenges. Look at our ageing society, the higher burden of disease. And so the NHS is at a fork in the road. And we have a choice about how it should meet those demands. Don't act and leave it to die. Raise taxes on working people, or reform to secure its future. Now, working people can't afford to pay more, so it's reform or die. So let me be clear from the outset what reform does not mean. First, it does not mean abandoning those founding ideals of a public service, publicly funded, free at the point of use. The basic principle of dignity, inspired, of course, by Bevan, that when you fall ill, you should never have to worry about the bill. That is as true today as when the NHS was founded 76 years ago. And I believe in that very deeply. As some of you will know, my mum and my sister both worked in the NHS. My wife works in the NHS, and the NHS cared for my mum throughout what was a very long illness. So the NHS runs through my family like a stick of rock. But you know, this isn't just about emotion. It's about hard facts too. The NHS is uniquely placed for the opportunities of big data and predictive and preventative medicine. So the problem isn't that the NHS is the wrong model, it's the right model. It's just not taking advantage of the opportunities in front of it. And that's what we need to change. Second, reform does not mean just putting more money in. Now, of course, even in difficult financial circumstances, a Labour government will always make the investment in our NHS that is needed, always. But we have to fix the plumbing before turning on the taps. So hear me when I say this. No more money without reform. I'm not prepared to see even more of your money spent on agency staff who cost £5,000 a shift, on appointment letters which arrive after the appointment, or on paying for people to be stuck in hospital just because they can't get the care they need in the community. And tonight, there'll be 12,000 patients in that very position. That's enough to fill 28 hospitals. So we can't go on like this. As Lord Darzi has said, NHS staff are working harder than ever, but productivity has fallen because patients can't be discharged. Clinicians are spending their time trying to find beds rather than treating more patients. That isn't just solved by more money, it's solved by reform. And third, reform does not mean trying to fix everything from Whitehall. It really doesn't. When Lord Darzi says there are vital signs of the NHS and they're strong, he's talking about the talents and passions of our NHS workforce. That's what he's talking about, the breadth and depth of clinical talent, the extraordinary compassion and care of our NHS staff. If we're going to build an NHS that's fit for the future, then I tell you, we're going to do it with our NHS staff and with our patients too. We're going to change it together. Now that starts with the first steps, the 40,000 extra appointments every week. But we've also got to do the hard yards of long-term reform. So this government is working at pace to build a 10-year plan. Something so different from anything that's gone before. This plan will be framed around 3 big shifts, 3 fundamental reforms, which are rooted in what Lord Darzi has set out today. First, moving from an analogue to a digital NHS. We can already see glimpses of the extraordinary potential of technology, like the world's first ever non-invasive, knifeless surgery for kidney cancer. Just imagine that. It's pioneered by Leeds teaching hospitals. Or the precision cancer scanners. I saw some of them yesterday. Or simply transforming how we manage a condition. We went to Kingsmill Hospital earlier this year and met a 12-year-old girl called Molly. She's using her smartphone to monitor her glucose levels, instead of being forced to repeatedly prick her fingers. It made such a difference to her daily life and gave great reassurance to her mum, who could remotely check on the settings and the findings. So we've got to make these opportunities available to everyone. We've got to use technology to empower patients and give them much greater control over their healthcare. Take an innovation like the NHS app. This could be a whole digital front door to the NHS. Appointments, self-referral, reminders for checkups and screenings, patients in control of their own data, healthcare so much more transparent. so you always know your options and the standards that you should expect. And you know, earlier this year I went to Alderhay Hospital. Many of you will know it. It's a fantastic hospital where they carry out heart surgery on infants, which is really humbling to see. And I met the parents of a 2-year-old who'd had extremely complicated heart surgery. Tiny infant, incredible surgery. I asked the parents about their child's history and conditions. How did he come to be here? What's the story behind this? And as they told me, I could see them welling up as they went through the history, the conditions, all the background. And then they told me that every time they went to a different hospital, they had to go through all of that over and over again. They really struggled to tell the story, and they had to do it every single time because the records weren't held electronically. So we've got to have fully digital patient records so that crucial information is there for you whenever you go to the NHS. And while I'm on technology, we're also going to throw the full weight of the British government behind our world-leading life sciences. Second, and Sarah mentioned this, we've got to shift more care from hospitals to communities. Now, the King's Fund has long called for this. Successive governments have repeatedly promised it. But what's happened? The opposite. The share of the NHS budget spent on hospitals has actually increased. Now, this 10-year plan has to be the moment that we change that. The moment we begin to turn our national health service into a neighbourhood health service. That means more tests, scans, healthcare offered on high streets and town centres, improved GP access, bringing back the family doctor, offering digital consultations for those that want them, virtual wards, and more patients safely looked after in their own homes, where we can deal with problems early before people are off work sick and before they need to go to hospital. And we have to make good on the integration of health and social care, so we can discharge those 26 hospital worth of patients, saving money, reducing the strain on our NHS, and giving people better treatment. And third, in terms of the shifts, we have got to be much bolder in moving from sickness to prevention. Now, we've already announced NHS health checks in workplaces, blood pressure checks at dentists and opticians. But that's just the beginning. Planning for 10 years means we can make long-term investments in new technologies that will help catch and prevent problems earlier. And there are some areas in particular where we've just got to be more ambitious, like children's mental health or children's dentistry. You know, one of the most shocking things that I saw, this was actually when I was at Alderhay Hospital again, I mentioned the heart operations, but whilst I was there talking to the staff, it became clear that the single biggest cause of children going into that hospital between the ages of 6 and 10 was to have their rotting teeth taken out. I couldn't believe it. I was genuinely shocked. All politicians say they're shocked too often, but I was really shocked. The single biggest cause of going into hospital, 6 to 10-year-olds, have your teeth taken out. Can you think of anything more soul-destroying? For the children, what a price to pay. For that brilliant NHS team who want to use their talents to save lives, spending their time taking out rotting teeth, something that could so easily have been prevented. And look, I know some prevention measures will be controversial, but I'm prepared to be bold even in the face of loud opposition. So no, some of our changes won't be universally popular. We know that. But I will do the right thing for our NHS, our economy, and our children. Now, the task before us is the work of our generation. We've already hit the ground running, negotiating an end to the strikes, which the Tories refused to do, strikes which were costing us a fortune. And we inherited 1,000 trainee GPs who were set to graduate into unemployment. Instead, we've hired them. But only fundamental reform and a plan for the long term can turn around the NHS and build a healthy society. Now, it won't be easy. It won't be quick. It will take a 10-year plan, not just the work of one parliament. But I know we can do it because we've done reform before. The last Labour government reformed the NHS to deliver better outcomes for patients and better value for taxpayers. Conservative governments then undid that good work, which only goes to prove once again that only a Labour government can reform the NHS. And my Labour government has a huge mandate for change. We're mission-driven. And I think the themes of this conference today are fitting for this moment. Challenge, change, and hope. Because the challenge is clear before us. The change could amount to the biggest reimagining of the NHS since its birth. And the hope, well, that's what's really exciting and galvanising about this moment. Because if we get this right, people can look back and say, this was the generation that took the NHS from the worst crisis in its history, got it back on its feet, and made it fit for the future. Thank you very much for listening.
At the King's Fund about this report by Lord Darcy, who is an eminent surgeon into the NHS, the 9-week report. He spent far too much of that report, in my view, Bev, talking about why the Tories were so awful.
Of course he did. That's what Starmer's doing. How much longer can he keep doing that for? The bit that I... Obviously, if you watch the show regularly, you'll know I do not think that apps are the solution to everything, particularly when it comes to healthcare. I think actually human beings tend to do a pretty good job of looking after other human beings rather than whatever the app says on your phone. And how do you feel about health checks in the workplace? NHS health checks in the workplace. So you could go to work, they'll stand you on the scales, they'll do your blood pressure, they'll listen to your heart in the workplace, and then they will tell your doctor, and then who else? Will they tell you health insurance? Will they tell you life insurance?
I'm not sure who's going to do the tests. Didn't say.
He didn't say. But it's just bizarre. I mean, you know I'm a big fan of taking personal responsibility, trying to get well and fit and healthy. It's not easy, but we all have to do it a little bit. But I'm not sure that should be anything that your boss gets involved in at work.
Yeah. We've got the panel with us, Carol Malone and Nikki Hodgson. Carol, he did say in there, actually, I was quite heartened by that in his report, because the report is more interesting than Starmer's speech, that it is, quotes, implausible that more cash for hospitals will lead to improved performance, because it's not about money, it's about...
Maybe that's the first thing he said, ever said I agree with.
No, that wasn't Starmer, that was Darcy.
Oh, that was Darcy. Okay.
In his report.
Well, and that's absolutely the case. We've been saying that for years, but you know what, subsequent... Governments don't want to take on the sacred cow that is the NHS. They don't want to mess with it because they know it's going to involve people paying some money for their healthcare at some point. So they don't want to be the ones to do it. And the Tories haven't done it. And I don't believe Labour's going to do it. I mean, I did listen to a lot of what he said there when he said that this reform is going to be different than anything that's ever been done before. I don't believe it for a nanosecond. And I think it was light on detail, what he said, what Starmer said. And I find it astonishing that, you know, how long did that Grenfell report take? However many years, 7 years or something. This report took 9 weeks. Yeah. And I'm thinking, OK, so the behemoth that is the NHS, that is in the biggest mess you could ever imagine, they've got a report out in 9 weeks that says how they're going to make it better again, that's why I don't believe it.
Yeah. But I just like that. Don't you think, though, that Darcy brings his experience of working in the NHS for years to it? He probably could have sat down and written that report in 5 minutes, maybe.
He probably did, but charged for 9 weeks.
But Nick, he doesn't really say how to fix it. He tells us what's wrong with it, and he says if we're going to have an move from analogue to digital, all right.
We did that once, not remember?
And move from NHS hospitals to GPs, primary care, pharmacies. Well, good luck with that. When did you last see a GP?
Well,
can you get through on the phone to a GP?
Well, and also we had a report out last week saying that local rural pharmacies were in decline.
Yeah.
You know, we've got a massive problem with the closure of pharmacies, and then at the same time they're saying, well, pharmacists have got to serve half of your medical needs so we can take the pressure off GPs. I mean, I think back to when I worked in the NHS in the 2000s in various different clinical departments, and, you know, I was a temp, and I was is a classic example of someone brought in to fill gaps that really shouldn't have been serviced by me because I was completely out of my depth with some of the jobs that I was given to do.
What job
for
were you
example,
doing?
Well, for example, I had to do the cancer patient list, like which patients got cancer treatment first.
Oh,
and I would sit
God.
in a surgical meeting, listen, because I had Latin and Greek from school. That's the only reason they gave me the job.
Are joking.
And because I could understand the words, I had to sit in there and then help relay the information to the patients and make the decisions.
This is terrible.
And I was about 20.
No.
I was about 20, 21 when I did that job.
That is
and
shocking.
and there's no training. They just say, there's your temp job, you know, fill your little hours in a week and go and do whatever we give you to do. And
Makes you wonder who's answering this phone on 111, doesn't it?
Well, we know who's answering the phone. They're not all medically trained people. They're not nurses. We know they're not necessarily even medical practitioners. They're just whoever. That is astonishing. And this is no insult to you.
No, of course
But it's
not.
probably why we have one of the worst cancer care systems in
Well,
Europe.
exactly. I was completely unqualified to do that role. I had no, you know, I didn't have the experience of age. You know, at this age, I'd be able to deal with people better. I couldn't even do that.
There was a story last week that said would people, they're going to start letting nurses make assessments now instead of doctors. And I'm thinking, no, this is not denigrating nurses either, because they do an incredible job. However, they don't do 7 years at medical school. No. They're not trained. They don't have the kind of medical degree that doctors have.
And they don't get paid the salaries.
And they don't get paid the salary, so why should they take the responsibility? But this is what's going to happen. Our healthcare now is going to be lumbered onto pharmacists, nurses, people like yourself, temps who are doing it for a few weeks, you know, who lives and who dies, who gets cancer first. Yeah. And he's not telling us anything that's going to change it. He's talking about more care in the community. When I was a kid, if you were in hospital, if you were older people got put into these, there was a name for these hospitals that they put you into that were kind of aftercare. What was the name?
Yes, they were.
There was a name for them. And it wasn't like specialised medical treatment, but you put people there
like a recovery.
To recover.
Recuperation and rehabilitation.
Yeah. And there used to be one in every town and in every village.
Great idea.
And it got you out of the bed, it freed up the bed, and so nurses could take care of the elderly who had nowhere else to go. They scrapped all them to save money. So now you have elderly people, thousands and thousands of beds in this country are taken up by people who are fine, but they've just got nowhere else to go.
But he also says in the report, Darcy, he talks about the collapse in productivity. So surgeons are now doing, fewer...
it's 13%.
It's 12% drop, 12% fewer operations per surgeon than 5 years ago.
They're probably on strike most of the time.
We're just going to go back to the report because Olivia Utley is about to ask the Prime Minister a question. GB News' Olivia Utley.
Reforming healthcare. Do you predict that the BMA will now embrace productivity reform with open arms?
Well, look, I've said we'll do this with the staff, and we will. But I know from my old job running the Crown Prosecution Service that whenever you try to reform anything, there will be some people, I'm afraid, who will say, oh, don't do that, it's better as it is, I wouldn't do that, keep things as they are. We have to take that attitude on, in my view. It's an inhibitor of change. So whilst we say we will do it with people, and we will, do it together, and we will, I know in my heart of hearts we will meet pockets of people who will say, don't do it, slow down, go over there, not over there, leave things as they are. We have to take that on, and we will take that on. That's part and parcel of the change that we need to bring about. Thank you. I've got Natasha from LBC.
The Labour Party, when the BMA were constantly on strike the last 12 months, calling out the BMA. He's talking about resistance to change. How's he going to get past the BMA when they did not call out the strikes?
Well, they've tried throwing money at them, and that didn't work, so I don't know what they're going to do to do that. You know, we know that people died during those strikes. We know that people's care was scrappy during those strikes, even though the BMA insists that the most serious cases are covered. We know they're not. They're just not covered. So, you know, how is he going to make that? It doesn't matter how much that now is run by militants, the BMA. It's not run by people who care about doctors particularly. It's run by people who hate governments and want money. And that is going to be the problem in future. If he's talking about cutting costs, how is he going to do that when they're going to be demanding ever more every year?
I think we have to go to the break.
Yeah, I think we're going to go to...
Still to come, we're talking about Rachel Reeves, what she's going to do with the economy.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Another pretty cold feeling day to come for many of us. Still a few showers as well, but also some sunshine, particularly throughout the rest of this morning across eastern areas of England, once again, similar to yesterday morning, in fact, as well as parts of Scotland too. Now, the most frequent showers this morning will be across parts of North Wales. They'll push further inland through the rest of the day into the afternoon, and cloud will bubble up just about everywhere, bringing a risk of showers to most areas, but they'll be most frequent across coastal areas. And if you're exposed to this northerly Arctic wind, you will notice a chill in the air once again. As we head into this evening, though, this northerly wind does slowly start to shift to more of a northeasterly wind. So that means that showers will become more dominant across eastern parts of the country. Eastern areas of northern England seeing quite a few showers, but that does also mean that it will turn drier across western areas, particularly across western Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England, where we've really seen the bulk of the showers for the past couple of days. Still a few showers inland here and there, but for most of us, it should stay fairly dry, though some showers will likely continue across the far north coast of southeastern England overnight tonight. Clearer skies will develop. We've got high pressure building in to end the week, so clear skies quite widely. Temperatures will fall away quite quickly this evening. It's likely to be the coldest start tomorrow morning of the week so far, and temperatures could be as low as around -4 degrees in northern areas, -1 or 2 across some rural areas further south, so potentially a grass frost out there for you on Friday morning, but also quite a lot of sunshine. And Friday is going to be a nice bright day. The sunshine should be much more longer lived through the day compared to the rest of the week, but we will see cloud building in from the northwest. You can see it moving into parts of Northern Ireland here, western Scotland, to end the day on Friday. But ahead of this area of rain, a fine day and temperatures climbing towards the mid to high teens.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. In the Highland, the A9 is closed in both directions south of the A96 Raigmore interchange at Inverness for an investigation with long delays towards there. And as you divert, on the M61 in Lancashire, there's a lane closed northbound after an accident between junction 9 for the M65 and the M6, causing long delays. The M1 in Leicestershire is partly blocked northbound, where a vehicle broke down between junctions 24 and 25 near Nottingham and Derby, causing delays. The M40 in Warwickshire is closed northbound from junction 12 at Gaydon to 14 at Leamington after an accident with long delays towards there. And as you divert, on the M4 in London, it's down to a single lane eastbound at junction 3 at Heston after an accident with queues from junction 4B for the M25. And on the M27 in Hampshire, there's a lane closed westbound where someone's broken down between junctions 7 and 5 near Southampton with queues almost back to junction 9 at Fareham.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
.40, this is Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Beth Turner.
So Rachel Reeves is meeting Stormont leaders to discuss the Northern Ireland funding model today.
She's also sorry.
No, carry on.
No.
Oh, go on. She's also going to meet the UK bank bosses with reports the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey could attend.
And, of course, we've got the budget coming up at the end of October. Let's cross now to the East Midlands, where geopolitics and financial expert Roger Gewolf joins us. Roger, we know they're preparing us for huge tax rises, capital gains, probably inheritance tax. They've not ruled out a property tax, a wealth tax. We're already more taxed in this country than we ever have been since the Second World War.
You left out the rumour or more that we're also going to be taxed XP per mile for driving our cars.
Very good point.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And how does this fit? But how does this fit in with the Chancellor's boastful strategy of growth, growth, growth? How do you create growth if you tax us even more, Roger?
You don't. I think that they're very buoyed, very bolstered by things like Tata Steel's £1.25 billion investment that's coming in, even more so by Amazon Web Services' £8 billion investment that's coming in over the next 5 years. Just those two things, Andrew, are going to create some 20,000 jobs. And that's wonderful. And basically, they want to sell us the idea of a growth while doing everything that is non-growth at the same time by jumping on those trains of Amazon and Tata. But it's really not possible. It's somewhere between mad and naive. What they are announcing to do with tax with energy, with how they are going to be treating the older, lower earning pensioner and other type of citizens in terms of tax take, and the apparent recent attacks on free speech are all things that you would think would drive investors away and produce a low growth economy. So it's a push me, pull you situation, which is not untypical for Starmer and Labour. I mean, let me just say, they have the opportunity to become the greatest heroes in history for easily fixing all the things wrong with this country after 14 years of Labour neglect and ignorance of the electorate. But they seem to be proceeding in totally the different direction.
Fascinating. Roger, short but sweet. We're a bit pressed for time because of Keir Starmer this morning, but thank you. It's always good to see you. Roger Gewolb there. We've got...
Do have to correct, right? He did say 14 years of Labour neglect. He meant Tory.
I wondered whether it was a Freudian slip, I have to say, because I just feel a little bit like we've... Carol and Nikki are still here with us.
But you wanted to raise the point about Starmer, the still ongoing row about scrapping fuel duty, the winter fuel allowance, Carol, for
I know what you mean.
pensioners.
Yeah, he's been asked, Sunak yesterday in the Commons asked him for the public to have sight and figures about the impact statement of how cutting the winter fuel allowance will affect pensioners this winter, i.e., to put it bluntly, how many will die. Because we know that Labour did research in 2017, its own research, which said that 3,800 would die. Now, Starmer is refusing to make these figures public, and there's only one reason he's doing that. It's because they're way higher than 4,000.
Or they haven't done the assessment.
Or they haven't done the assessment. And I suspect it's actually the fact that they're way higher than 4,000. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I saw an older lady on the television this week, and it made me weep. She was talking about this winter she can only have her heating on at 13 degrees. She doesn't turn her oven on at all. She's terrified of what's coming. And, you know, I think this government, which is supposed to look after the most vulnerable in society, they don't get older people, they don't get elderly people, they don't get that even if they have savings, a few grand in savings, which puts them out of eligibility for pension credit, they hang on to that because we've all been taught that when you get older, that you might need money for some big thing. You might need it for your health care or whatever. So they hang on to the bit. They're not spending it. They're not using it for food or heating. They're keeping it in case they have to look after themselves or a loved one. And this government should understand that, and it's not getting it. And it's actually keeping... Anyway, it's millions of people.
But what they're also doing, Nikki, which I find so distressing, is they won't hold these massive corporations to account.
Absolutely, I was just about to say that.
For Jubes at 6 o'clock this week, and we had Steve McCabe on last night, former Labour MP, and he said, why aren't they attacking the standing charge with these fuel companies? You know, we've got these standing charges that, whether you're using it or not, are going up enormously. Why won't they attack those?
Because they still want to try and make out that it's to do with the war in Ukraine, don't they? They're still using that line. They're still saying, oh, it's circumstances beyond our control, which is why we can't touch these conglomerates and we can't, you know, take them to task. I mean the whole thing about this winter fuel allowance issue is actually that it's not a maths thing, actually, it's a principle thing. And Labour should fundamentally have never touched the winter fuel allowance. When, exactly as you say, Carol, they're meant to care about the most vulnerable.
6 Conservative chancellors.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's exactly what Carol says. Older people have a different relationship with money. And so what if you live in a house that's worth £1 million? You can't liquidate the value of your home. Well, sometimes people end up having to do that when they have healthcare issues. But, I mean, it doesn't matter the expense of your house. If you've still got to heat it...
Nikki, this policy is going to save a piddling £1.2 billion, which is outrageous when you consider that the projection for the public sector payments this year is £14 billion. So if we've got this fantasy black hole, which we haven't, but if we had, why are we giving public sector workers 40 billion and robbing pensioners?
We've got to move on, I'm afraid, ladies. We've been beaten by the clock, but don't go anywhere. We're going to talk about whether Labour can save the NHS after this very quick break. This is GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Meghan Markle is finding it very, very difficult to recruit staff for her lifestyle brand, which is called American Riviera Orchard. There's a mouthful for you. Apart from a jam gifted to influencers earlier this year, the brand is yet to launch any products.
Well, let's speak to our US royal and showbiz reporter, Kinsey Schofield. Good morning to you, Kinsey. Who's going to want that gig?
I mean, there are rumors that Netflix has said, allow us to manage the retail strategy. If she can't manage to find a CEO or somebody willing to work with her, Netflix sees an opportunity there.
To be an influencer, people have got to want to be like you. Do people like her?
I mean, this has been her biggest issue in the last few years, is realizing that there's been a shift when it comes to their popularity. Harry and Meghan believed their own hype when they said on that Netflix series that the reason they were ostracized was because they were much more popular than the British royals. They were more popular than Prince William, more popular than Princess Kate. And their popularity has declined immensely. And now they are desperate to win people over again.
Most people have to be liked or admired, and I put it to you, Kinsey, she'll have difficulty on both fronts.
Netflix is not going to renew this contract. I mean, they are fearful that this cooking show, this polo show, will not connect with the audience. And now they want us to believe that Meghan is at home cooking all this banana bread and having her best friend Chrissy Teigen over for scones. People aren't going to buy it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Isabel Webster. Thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. 10:49, Britain's Newsroom. Carol and Nikki are still with us. Right, Carol, what should we talk about?
Well, I wanted to talk about Rachel Reeves today, trying to justify the fact that she gets £3,700, has claimed that in the last 5 years, for her heating bills at her second home in Leeds. And she's actually just saying that, you know, MPs have to be in, when she was an MP, you have to be in London, da-da-da. And I'm thinking, so you are on 158 grand a year. Your husband is very well paid.
He's a very senior civil servant.
Earning
at
6
least
figures.
120,000, maybe
So
more.
there you go. So there's a household that's bringing in nearly 300 grand. And she's talking about how she needed this heating money. Pensioners are on 10.5 grand a year. And yet we have our Chancellor who's going to take the money away from society's most vulnerable. And yet her and all the other cabinet members have got their snouts in the trough and they're taking it for their heating bills. And it makes me boil with rage that they can't see the hypocrisy of this. They can't see the cruelty of this.
They've completely lost the narrative, Nikki, of the political landscape since they've gone into power.
I don't know what on earth is going on. I mean, you just asked me, are you still left-wing? Because I probably sound like I'm not at the minute, given the absolute mess.
Yeah, I did at the break. I said, you do still consider yourself to be a Labour supporter?
I mean, I do, but it's like, having worked in PR, as we were talking about, you know, with the winter fuel allowance story, they're saying that you're going to be better off with a triple lock. Front load the story. Start with that. Where's the story saying how amazing everything's going to be that the triple lock's protected? And then when you've got to cut the winter fuel allowance or means test it, it's not so much of an issue. I don't know who's doing PR for these people.
But even that's not true, Nick. It's not true because food prices went up 7% this year. The triple lock made the pensions go up about 6.8%. So they're no better off than they were.
No, but I mean, if you think maybe that is an argument, Carol, against it. But what I'm saying is, if you're in Labour, in Team Labour, doing this work, that's when you start to persuade people.
So that some people with the triple lock note, it means some pensions will go into taxation for the first time.
Yes.
And I can't. I mean, and why? How can that be fair?
And, you know, people people talk about pensioners having pensions, you know, my mum had a pension. She inherited my dad's pension from the electricity board. It was about £6,000 a year.
Yeah.
It was, you know, when you eke it out over 12 months,
But, you know, at the TUC conference, I counted. I was there this week. I counted in the Prime Minister's speech. He mentioned workers 19 times in his speech. How many times did he mention pensioners? Not once.
Not once.
We should talk about
once.
We should talk about the TUC and your experience there this week, Piers. You got thrown out of a TUC meeting, didn't you?
I've tried to get in to hear Angela Rayner's speech. She's the Deputy Prime Minister, and this person...
Say what you mean.
Came up to me and said, can I help? I was sat there very quietly waiting in this room for the...
Probably not. Should be entitled.
She was going to share a platform with Mick Whelan, the head of ASLEF, who's done very well out of the Labour government.
Yes.
15% pay rise. She threw me out.
What?
It's a private event. It's a private event. I said, it's not a private event, madam.
Yes.
This is a TUC conference.
Yes.
Here's the programme, advertised, speech by the Deputy Prime. Threw me out. There was...
And of course,
I raised Cane. The TUC intervened. I was allowed back in. Angela Rayner was mysteriously trapped in traffic.
How
So didn't
convenient.
get on a platform with Mick Whelan, so I could have asked her about the 15% pay raise on the day they were voting about the winter fuel allowance.
Well, they seem to be. Well, they definitely seem to be shying away from any sort of. I mean, you know, we've had very few on this channel.
I know.
They don't want the full grilling, do they?
But they
want
don't understand. Look, again, when you work in PR, when you work for a party, friends close, enemies close. So you let people in. You have relationships with
This is the
people.
worst PR because I mean I think Piers said on the we had a chat in the toilet there. Piers said on the way out to this PR one.
It is a unisex toilet, just so people know that.
Okay. It is a unisex toilet.
Yes, we have to say that point.
Piers actually said, thanks very much for that. And she said,
I did say
for what? And you said, well, because you've just given me a great story. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I have been going to party conferences since 1988. I have never, ever been thrown out of one. Even in the dark days of Jeremy Corbyn, they'd say, oh, it's you. You're not going to
But they need it. Otherwise, if you ban people, what happens? They turn against you, even if they weren't already against you in the first place.
Got a full page in the Daily Mail.
Here it is. Here it is, folks.
Thank you very much, bully boy Angela Rayner.
And it's just a kind of propaganda press. All it means is that they will always control. They're trying to control the narrative, but as we said, it's just not working.
It's not, and it's not how it works. It's not how the system works.
Don't censor who can ask you questions. Don't censor.
Well, no, because that's like what Trump does when he picks his kind of.
I mean, this is not what happens in a democracy where they try to hide the truth from you.
They're coming back.
We're going to be talking
to Debbie McGee.
Yeah, Debbie McGee.
Debbie McGee.
Don't go anywhere.
Oh, lovely.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Another pretty chilly feeling day after the cold night last night. It's actually going to be a colder night in the coming night, and there will still be a few showers around. But I think a generally drier day, particularly across western areas. We've got high pressure building in for Friday, but before then, still a cold Arctic northerly wind pushing into parts of Scotland and northern England, northeastern England in particular through today. So here it will still feel particularly cold in the wind, but further south and west, a little bit more shelter here, so it will feel slightly warmer today compared to yesterday. Again, showers will develop into the afternoon quite widely across the UK, heaviest though across coastal areas, and temperatures in the low teens for many of us. Now into this evening, we'll continue to see those showers at first, particularly across northeastern coasts of Scotland. But as the winds shift to more of a northeasterly, it will become drier across more western areas. So a dry evening to come for western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland. Couldn't rule out the odd shower, but I think there will be some clear skies before the sun sets. Into parts of Wales as well. Inland areas, though, of central England, southeast of England in particular, will probably see the potentially most heaviest showers into this evening. But showers will tend to fade away as that high pressure builds in overnight tonight. So a widely clear night away from the far southeast coast. We'll continue to see a risk of showers overnight. And that does mean that temperatures will fall away quite quickly this evening. So a colder night to come compared to last night. Just about anywhere rurally could catch a ground or air frost overnight tonight. And temperatures in towns and cities, though, just above zero. So a cold but sunny start to the day to come on Friday. I think the sunshine will be much longer lived through Friday, as we do have that high pressure building in. Cloud will tend to thicken, though, across northwestern areas ahead of the next band of rain, but with more in the way of sunshine and lighter winds, it will feel warmer, with temperatures reaching the high teens for some of us.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's an incredible... Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained. I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
11 a.m. on Thursday, the 12th of September. Live across the UK, this is Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very good morning. So, NHS in crisis. Lord Darcy's independent investigation has concluded the NHS is in a critical condition.
But the vital signs are normal, which will suggest that we can do something about this. To do it well, we need to engage the whole staff, patients, the public, the political leadership, all aligned to make that change happen as quickly as we can, because we...
That was Lord Darcy speaking. Sir Keir Starmer has promised the public he will undertake the biggest reimagining of the NHS in decades.
NHS may be in a critical condition, but its vital signs are strong. And we need to have the courage to deliver long-term reform. Major surgery, not sticking plasters.
And Labour's renewing renters' rights. Changes are set to include a ban on no-fault evictions and reducing Tennessee rent rises in England. But what do you think of that?
And what about this idea? Prisoners to jump the housing queue. That's the idea of the Labour Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who says with a housing shortage in the capital, recently released prisoners should be given priority to help prevent them from reoffending.
And is it our late Queen or is it Mrs Doubtfire? Can you guess who that is meant to be? It is a statue. If you're listening on the radio, it's worth having a look online just to see the picture of this. One commentator said, it's not good. What do you think?
It's not good, it's terrible. And philanthropy, they're calling it. Charities across the UK are celebrating a groundbreaking increase in charitable gifts in Wales. We're going to be joined by the TV personality and Strictly star, Debbie McGee.
We did an interview, if you missed it just earlier, with one of the guys that works with prisoners who come out and they have amazing results in terms of reoffending being down. He said, Sadiq Khan, you can give them a house, but if they've not got money to live on, they've not got a job, they've not got a way to pay for it, it's just going to end badly for them. So, typical.
And he also said the release of 1,700 prisoners this week was a knee-jerk reaction to overcrowding.
And he said it will definitely result in more crime.
Isn't that terrible?
GBNews.com/your say. We're going to go and read your messages now while Sam Francis reads you the news.
Very good morning to you. It is just after 11 o'clock and the top story this hour. Sir Keir Starmer says the NHS is broken. but not beaten, delivering a stark message after a damning report into the health service. Lord Darcy's rapid review highlights rising demand, low productivity and poor morale, just some of the major challenges now facing the NHS. It's after figures out this morning have shown ballooning waiting times and delays in A&E and in cancer care. Well, speaking earlier, the Prime Minister warned there will be no more money without reform and said big shifts are needed to secure the NHS's future.
Only fundamental reform and a plan for the long term can turn around the NHS and build a healthy society. Now, it won't be easy, it won't be quick, it will take a 10-year plan, not just the work of one Parliament, but I know we can do it.
Prime Minister there speaking earlier. Well, the Conservatives have said it is time for Labour to turn rhetoric into action, and Shadow Health Secretary Victoria Adkins told us this morning she is concerned by the government's slow first steps tackling the crisis.
I'm concerned because the first action of this government was to allow a budget-busting pay rise for junior doctors with no productivity forms attached. And they are also, I hear, going to cancel the productivity plan that I was bringing forward for technology. And if that is what they're doing, then that is of concern, because I fear we're in for an even rougher ride.
And some breaking news in the last few minutes from the Home Office. Martin's Law, named after 29-year-old Martin Hett, who was one of 22 people killed in the Manchester Arena bombings, has been introduced to Parliament this morning. The new legislation aims to strengthen public protection against terrorism. Under that law, venues must adopt actions like training staff and improving security protocols, depending, of course, on their size and capacity. It will fulfil the Prime Minister's promise to Martin's mother, Figan Murray, to bring in the new law after her tireless campaigning. In a sign that major changes could be ahead for the UK's workforce, health and care worker visa applications have plunged by 83% from April to August of this year. New figures from the Home Office reveal dependent visa applications also dropped by 73%. Meanwhile, student visas saw a 17% drop, but dependents of students took an even sharper hit with an 83% decline. In contrast, applications for skilled worker visas rose by 18% over the same period. Turning to news overseas, and 6 aid workers with the United Nations Refugee Agency have been killed in 2 airstrikes on a school in Gaza, marking the highest death toll among UN staff in a single incident. One of those killed was a manager of a UN shelter that housed around 12,000 displaced people, most of them women and children. The school has now been hit 5 times since the war began, which erupted following a Hamas-led attack on Israel on the 7th of October that sadly killed 1,200 people and left 250 abducted. Ukraine has called on the UK and the US, in fact, to lift restrictions on using Western weapons against Russian targets. That's during a visit by the Foreign Secretary and the US Secretary of State. At a press conference last night in Kyiv, David Lammy and Antony Blinken praised Ukraine's bravery, but avoided committing to President Zelensky's request to use long-range missiles for strikes inside Russian territory. Both leaders, though, did pledge financial support, with £600 million from the UK and more than $700 million from the US. That's for humanitarian support and energy needs. Discussions will continue in Washington on Friday. Finish what you started. That's the warning to the Prime Minister from a think tank following this summer's nationwide riots. After violent clashes in towns and cities, sparked, of course, by the deaths of 3 young girls in Southport, Sir Keir Starmer vowed that offenders would face the full force of the law, with over 200 now sentenced. However, British Future, that think tank, says the root cause must be tackled, calling for integration between convicted rioters and community groups to prevent more violence. Experts are also calling for a national social cohesion strategy, warning that without it, divisions could deepen. Data centres will be classified as critical national infrastructure to protect against cyber attacks and IT blackouts, the government has announced today. The facilities store vital data from NHS records to smartphone photos and financial information. Their new status will now put data centres on par with water, energy and other emergency services, making sure that there is greater government support to fend off any cyber threats or outages. And the move coincides with a proposed multi-billion-pound investment in Hertfordshire to build Europe's largest data centre that will create over 700 local jobs. And finally, some fascinating space news for you. History is in the making today as the Polaris Dawn crew are attempting the first ever spacewalk by a non-professional group of astronauts. We can take you live inside that space capsule as the commander and billionaire Jared Isaacman and his crewmate Sarah Gillis are preparing any moment now to leave their modified SpaceX Dragon capsule. And they will do so without the usual safety of an airlock some 400 miles above Earth. They'll rely on experimental spacesuits and life support hoses to perform critical tests in the vacuum of space. Well, that mission is privately funded, and Isaacman says the risks are, well, they're worth it, he says, to advance space exploration. And as soon as we see that they are leaving that space capsule, we will bring those live pictures to you for that moment in space exploration history. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'll be back with you in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Always fascinating, those space stories. I'd actually love to go to space.
No way.
I would.
Would you?
Yeah. I think it would be the trip of a lifetime. Just to so you can look back at Earth and get on the moon. I met Buzz Aldrin, who was the second man on the moon.
Anyone out there got a rocket?
She doesn't want me to come back.
Elon, if you're watching, send him. Anyway, we're going to be talking about that. We don't know anything about that spacewalk. We're both a bit gripped there, but we're going to take some live pictures, I think, in just a minute. Oh, we are. We're taking them now.
This is the Polaris Dawn, their first ever spacewalk. This is an American space mission, and they're not professional astronauts.
We're watching these live pictures now. Where's Tom Harwood when you need him? He's probably in that blooming space capsule.
He'd like to be.
Let me tell you what it is. I would not want to do that at all. Let me tell you what's going on. Right, so this is, if you're listening on the radio, we're looking inside the capsule now. The crew are in their suits. One of them is called Isaacman. I presume that's his surname and not a nickname, Mr. Isaacman. The crew is talking about initiating seat rotation.
Well, why is
that means they're moving around the furniture so they can move around easily.
Is that interesting?
Apparently, it's all I've got, Andrew. It's literally all I've got.
I thought they were going to walk in space, not walk around the space capsule.
They're walking around a space capsule. It's hundreds of kilometres above the Earth. These two people now, they are preparing to exit a space capsule.
Oh, so they are going into space.
First commercial spacewalk attempt. OK, now I'm getting it. I'm so sorry about this. Jared Isaacman, 41, he's a billionaire.
Of course he is.
He chartered the Polaris Dawn mission, and Sarah Gillis, she's a senior engineer at SpaceX. That is, of course, Elon Musk's company. And they are in the capsule, as you can see now. They've got their spacesuits on, and
so they are going to walk in space. Well, that's an extraordinary experience. Any moment now, if you're listening on the radio, they are about to exit the space capsule. We think they're counting. So this is terribly exciting. They are making history. These will be the first non-commercial, non-professional astronauts
so
in
they've
space.
they've paid for the luxury of doing this. Let me tell you what they're wearing. They've got touch screen compatible gloves. Of course, you need those because there will be obviously touching all the things. They've got a flame-resistant outer layer on their suits. Hopefully they don't need that. They've got heel sliders to secure their feet to the footrest.
Right.
Probably fairly important, I would have thought. They've got hearing protection in the helmet because when they're taking off and going down, obviously they've got to look after their ears. This is such a high-risk thing to do.
It is. How long are they going to be up there for? But we think they're about to go into space, they're about to exit the capsule, although the picture may actually be stuck. What else are they doing? How much is it costing?
Well, apparently, I don't know. Hang on.
I mean, it's billionaire.
I am your secretary. I shall find this information out for you.
I mean, it's a billionaire's game, isn't it?
Have a look on you.
Look who else is racing to get in space. Richard Branson, Elon Musk.
Yeah.
I mean,
Jeff Bezos, he's got the Blue Origin. That's his company, isn't it? Obviously, SpaceX is Elon Musk.
It is the new space race. I can remember the excitement. I can remember the excitement of the Apollos going up. Do you remember? And I can remember my dad taking my brother and I out into the garden, pointing into the great blue yonder at night, and saying, "That's the spaceship." And we believed him.
And what was it? Just a star?
Just a star.
Or an aeroplane,
but we were so excited.
Oh.
I think I was 7 or 8 or something.
Oh,
so
how lovely.
excited. And it took me. It was only years later that I realised Dad had just said it to.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, and you've remembered it all these years later. That's so great. It is a major milestone. This obviously, that's obviously mission control there.
Yeah.
Those are all the people who are making sure that
we can listen in fact.
Initiating secondary O2.
And with that news, our EVA has begun.
So you're going to hear it referred to as primary and secondary O2. Primary is going to be that primary flow of oxygen to pressurize. Secondary is largely putting oxygen into their suits to help with cooling, but secondary is the first one we turn on. And so our O2 flow timer has started. The EVAs start at 3:12 a.m. Pacific. I'll do the math on UTC in a little bit. So this first operation, or this first step in the operation, is a suit purge. So inside their suit, obviously when the visor is still open, it's still a nitrox environment. It's the same as the cabin. And since they're going to be at a lower pressure than what you can basically live at with oxygen levels, they're going to be on pure O2. They're going to be a 100% oxygen environment. And I mean, you guys were kind of in the same thing. And it's because like your suit, you can't move a suit around at 14.7 psi, can you?
No,
maybe you can, but like.
So we're looking. If you're on the radio, we're looking in the capsule again now. It appears they're opening the top
that's why that mobility
to exit
is so
into space.
Because
right, so they are 1,400 kilometres above Earth.
What's that in miles?
They are the farthest humans have travelled since the Apollo program over 50 years ago.
So that's 400 miles. Amazing.
The Polaris program's Polaris Dawn crew were watching here, as we say, two private individuals who've paid for the luxury, the thrill, the privilege, you might say, the risk to take this spacewalk. It's happening right now. This is history in the making. The Polaris Dawn crew and SpaceX spacewalking from the furthest point from Earth, 870 miles.
The talk is they've decided to say how much it's costing, but the suggestion is both of them have paid literally hundreds of millions of dollars each for the privilege.
Well, they'd have to, wouldn't they?
Because I mean, you just got to look at the ground crew, dozens and dozens of people in ground crew coordinating this. Then there's the cost of building the capsule, getting it up there, keeping it up there. And how long are they going to go walking for?
It's an interesting
first ever private spacewalk.
That's actually one of the
this
reasons
is,
that the visors have this new coating on them, different than.
Should we listen to the commentary that we can just hear from the mission control?
That coating actually helps to insulate the individual inside the suit. So when they're looking at the sun.
Dragon SpaceX, a reminder, after the initiation of primary O2 flow, EV1, EV2 will need to adjust VOX threshold low following primary O2 flow initiation.
So it is the Dragon capsule. Just to remind you, it's Jared Isaacman and Scott Petit. He is the billionaire. She's an engineer, and this will be. And they're actually now in space. No, they're not quite yet. Are they? We thought they were. We've talked too soon. They're still. We're in the capsule.
Initiating primary O2.
So they're pressurizing their suits to equip themselves to go outside. God, they have to get these spot on right, don't they?
This is normal. This is with the airflow coming through.
So this is the commentary.
Are on Vox, meaning that their microphone is on the whole time. So Sarah and Jared are going to be adjusting their audio levels as this flow continues to help regulate that.
Yeah, the Vox will kind of attenuate, so it'll sound like this now, but as we get through the spacewalk, it'll kind of come down, and you'll just hear voices a little bit more clearly. They're their voices are actually going to change too. Like, did that happen to you? Did that throw you, Mike, the first time you heard that?
It absolutely did, yeah, because you're talking and you're going, who is that, right? 'Cause you don't realize how much different it can sound. Your voice can sound in that lower pressure environment.
Yeah. Speaking of lower pressure, we can see the pressure changing there with the telemetry in the bottom left-hand side of the screen, so we can see that suit pressure going up, and we're able to keep tabs there as well with the Dragon pressure. So Dragon on the far left circle, that's the pressure within the cabin, and then suit, obviously that's the pressure within the suits. So we'll actually be able to, and I think we've kind of been able to see it already, that these suits will inflate a little bit, look a little different. And we were talking about the visors before, so when they're in the sunlight, that coating will help keep them cool and not overheat them, and then when they're in shadow, it'll help keep them warm. So,
and it's also like your sunglasses as well.
Yeah.
Right? Serves that purpose.
All right, so at this moment, the suits are getting their primary pressurization. This takes about 3.5 minutes, a little bit less, and then we're going to go through those actual suit leak checks. The crew will probably get a reminder they have to stay really still when we do those leak checks, and I always was kind of wondering, like, why the heck? And like, if you bend your arms, you're actually going to start, changing the volume inside the suit, and that'll cause pressure spikes. And so
that's right.
You got to stay really still.
Yep.
And then after we get through the leak checks, we're going to go through kind of that final pre-breathe where they're going to hang out in that 100% O2 environment just to continue purging all of that excess nitrogen.
Suit pressure stable when purge complete. Activate secondary flow on. Report when complete.
EV1 open. Support 1 open. Support 2 open.
Right there, they finished the purge and they did a quick reinitiation of that secondary flow check.
Response, close secondary flow and report when complete.
I'd like to say that Tom Harwood has joined us in the studio because
and he is our
Harwood
resident space expert.
Gets very excited about these things. Andrew and I have never felt more out of our depth, Tom Harwood, than trying to commentate over the historic spacewalk. Fill us in, what's happening?
I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I am a fanboy. I mean, this is an incredibly exciting mission because this is the furthest any human has been from Earth since the days of the Apollo program. We're talking half a century. No one has been this far from Earth.
Why would they want to?
This is testing the boundaries of what we can do in space. You'll see that the spacesuits these guys are wearing are so much more slimline, so much more ergonomic. We can all remember the big, massive spacesuits that you can barely move in. Back at Michelin Men that the astronauts of yore used to wear. This is full of innovations. This Dragon capsule that they're in, it flew up, of course, on Elon Musk's reusable rockets. This is such a cheaper mission than any government has ever been able to deliver. So if this is successful, this could genuinely show us the path to much, much less expensive space travel. This is going to open the door to a new economic sector.
I'm very nervous.
Because we don't know how much it's cost, because the estimate is they've paid several £100 million to be on that.
Oh, absolutely.
On that spaceship.
Which, it's a lot of money, but
not if you're a billionaire.
Compared to the price that NASA would pay for something like that, that would be billions.
Yeah.
Compared to the price of the original Apollo missions, compared to the price of even the sort of the new missions that NASA is looking at and has delayed and delayed and delayed in terms of trying to get to the moon, the Artemis program, as it's known, this is so much cheaper. And it's in this funny sort of stage. We're talking about billionaires going up into space.
Yeah.
Only billionaires can afford it. Actually, frankly, the fact that any human being can afford it at all, rather than a government, shows how much cheaper it's become.
So does this mean Elon Musk has won the modern space race?
Elon Musk owns more than half of all satellites orbiting the Earth.
Does he really?
It's an extraordinary statistic. Elon Musk and his SpaceX innovation has reduced the cost of getting a kilogram into orbit by a factor of around 10. I mean, it is extraordinary, the innovation that SpaceX has provided. They're the first. They're the first to have really changed the commercial space world, but there are others now entering. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, has a company called Blue Origin. They're also looking, they've just been doing sort of tourism things to start with, but there are bigger rockets that they're developing that could be genuine competitors going forward. There are other more innovative, we've seen a few failed launches from Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson's outfit, but there are also lots of other smaller companies that might well take off. We're in the very early days of an incredibly exciting new sector.
I think it is exciting, but there are some people listening will be thinking, these men have got all this money and they're spending it on a rich woman's toy. Couldn't this money be spent doing something much more useful on the ground? What would you say to that, Tom, as a great space exploration lover?
I think that if we look at all of the big innovations that have happened on the ground, look at how many of them have actually come from space. If we didn't have the Apollo program in the 60s and early 70s, would we have had the technology boom that has enabled us to have a supercomputer in our pocket, that has enabled us to have the sort of communication and information technology that we couldn't live without today? Or if we didn't have the International Space Station orbiting the Earth consistently, would we have the same level of understanding or indeed development of treatments for diseases, of understanding of how things grow and develop? The amount of science that we get, sometimes incredibly surprisingly, you know, we'll be trying to solve one problem, and through trying to solve that problem, accidentally we'll invent something that then becomes completely necessary for another form of life. An example of this is Kevlar, bulletproof mesh that now all police wear, that soldiers wear when we're fighting. That's a byproduct of space exploration. No one thought that we're actually going to create a bulletproof vest here. They thought we're going to try and get to space, but we get a bulletproof vest out of it. And again and again and again you see an example like that.
Can we just talk about who these people are? Because I'm fascinated by this. So Jared Isaacman is one of the passengers, one of the astronauts. He's a philanthropist. He was born in 1983. So he is not an old man. He's 41 years old. He's got an estimated net worth of $2 billion. He made his money, let's have a look. He's the youngest of 4 children. He founded a retail payment processing company called United Bank Card, a point-of-sale payment. So he's made his money in sort of finance transactions. He then co-founded a Florida-based company that trains pilots, the United States Armed Forces. He's qualified in multiple military jet aircraft that he can fly himself. And in February 2021, he announced that he would serve as commander of Inspiration 4. That's the first private human space flights in which none of the people are aboard from a government agency. It's incredible, isn't it? He made a lot of money doing financial technology, and now he wants to explore. It's the great new frontier. It's the adventure, the call to adventure that I think so many people have within them. It's in the human condition. People want to climb mountains. People want to see the unknown. This is the next frontier. You know what, though, Tom? He's married and he's got 2 young daughters. If I was his missus, I'd be a bit hacked off about taking this kind of risk when you're a father of 2 children.
Yeah.
I mean, you might be. But then again,
that's what it's all about.
Risk takers are the people who push the human race forward, the people who first went to the Antarctic South Pole, the people who first climbed Everest, the people who first sailed out to discover a new continent. I mean, these are all things that have pushed us forward as a species. I should say that SpaceX have said that the suit leak checks are complete. This is when they have to expel all nitrogen from the internal sort of air makeup of the suits. Because if the air pressure is high, then they can't really move because they're blown up like a balloon. Sure. So they have to have an oxygen-only internal sort of air system within their suits so that they can actually bend it and move it. Otherwise, they're full up of air, like a Michelin man. Sure. So they need to expel all the things that aren't oxygen from the system, which looks like they have now been, it is now complete. All remaining nitrogen has been expelled from the crew's bodies.
And when they get out of the capsule, Tom, how far do they walk for?
They won't be going very far from the capsule because they'll be tethered.
Right.
So there is, we were able to see it a moment ago within the capsule there, that sort of long, snaking white, it looks like a very thick cable.
Yeah.
That will tether the spacewalker to the Dragon capsule. So only the length of that rope. But, of course, that feeling is extraordinary because currently they are 341 kilometres above the Earth's surface.
Right.
This is further, as I say, than anyone has been since people went to the moon. And to be outside the capsule, the safety of the capsule, just floating there in a spacesuit, connected by a cable to that capsule, will be just an extraordinary sense of loneliness.
And they'll be their suit will be equipped with cameras so we can see what they can see.
Yes.
See what I mean?
Yes, we'll be able to. I mean, this is really remarkable. When we'll all remember the very grainy footage of Neil Armstrong stepping down off Apollo 11.
One step for mankind and all that.
Yeah, one small step for man. Although there was a dispute. He always said until his later years that he actually said, this is one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Although everyone reported it because it was sort of fuzzy in the communications. One small step for man, a giant leap for mankind. I think either work. Actually, the one that everyone knows is sort of more poetic in a way, even if it doesn't make so much more sense.
The other passenger on here, this is the female, this is the woman, Sarah Gillis. She's the lead space operations engineer at SpaceX.
So she won't have paid for hers.
So she hasn't paid for hers. It looks like she is basically there because of the basis of her expertise. She's only 30.
Amazing.
Very young. She's the lead astronaut. She leads the astronaut training program, at SpaceX. She was the primary trainer for the Inspiration 4 crew. She's well as the voice of mission control during launch. If any of you have seen the Netflix series Countdown, Inspiration for Mission to Space, she is in that documentary. Very pretty, mixed-race woman. She... I mean, look, it's very high risk, this, Tom, isn't it? Let's be honest. Anything could go wrong for
Well, this is going to be the first time that the EVA suits, these spacesuits that they're wearing, has been tested at this altitude. This will be... I mean, of course, they've gone through many, many, many tests, but, you don't know until you know. You don't try until you try. And of course, the Dragon capsule has gone up many times before. It's one of the regular supply capsules for the International Space Station. The Crew Dragon has been used. It sent people up to the International Space Station and back down again. But the ISS, the International Space Station, is not very high above the Earth. It's in space, but barely in space. It's in low Earth orbit. This mission here has gone so much further than the ISS. I mean, the ISS is around 248 miles above Earth. I mean, currently these people are 542 kilometres above Earth. I mean, I'm trying to do the conversion in my head from miles to kilometres, but I mean, it is at least 100 miles further.
Yeah.
You're so excited by this, aren't you?
I think it is. It's kind of magical that we can see the live streaming of this.
Yeah.
I mean, even 20 years ago, we wouldn't be able to see this sort of thing live streamed. A lot of the footage that we now know and love from the Apollo era, they shot on film cameras and had to develop it when they got back to Earth. People didn't see it until weeks later. The fact that this is live, happening hundreds of kilometres above Earth, 554 kilometres above Earth, the fact we can see this live, I mean, this is a miraculous thing to see.
If this is a success, Tom, which apparently it is so far, how quickly do you think this could become almost, not perhaps irrelevant, but we could see commercial flights into space? I mean, how many years away is that?
I mean, At the moment, it's just the purview of billionaires.
Yeah.
Perhaps
Quite
in
a
a
lot of
decade
billionaires
it'll
in
be
the
the
world.
purview of millionaires.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the early days of flight.
Yeah.
Ordinary people didn't get in aeroplanes in the first few decades of flight. It was only people who were in the military or the most rich people on the face of the planet. Perhaps you'll see something similar in terms of first it has to be open to the billionaires, then the multimillionaires, then the millionaires, and perhaps you and I will be able to go in a few decades'
Tom's
time.
thinking, when are they sending up the first journeys? Because you'll be in the queue.
I might well be in the queue, but I wouldn't want to be first.
Yeah.
I think I'd want to have some pioneers go before me and go on a tried and tested route. But this tech is all going to be useful for the next moon mission. By the end of the decade, NASA say they want to get man and woman, the first woman on the moon and the next man on the moon. That's the Artemis program. And part of the Artemis program is actually Elon Musk's SpaceX. They've commissioned the Starship, an adapted version of Starship, which is the largest rocket on the face of the Earth that we've seen some of the tests for down in Boca Chica, Texas. We've shown some of those launches here on GB News. Elon Musk's Starship will be the lander for the moon. So it won't be getting people up to the level of the moon, but it will be bringing them down to the moon when they get there. And it will be that landing craft for the Artemis astronauts. So this is an entirely private space flight that we're seeing here, but it also feeds into the public-private partnership that now NASA engages with so much.
Who would be funding NASA's trip to the moon?
That's the American taxpayer. That's the Artemis program.
That's very expensive.
Very expensive, but less expensive than previously because there's this competitive tender.
Yeah.
You know, they had a competition for who's going to be the landing vehicle for the moon. Elon Musk's SpaceX was one of the people who put in a submission to that competition. So did Jeff Bezos. He came close. Boeing, I think, United Launch Alliance.
Of course, it used to be country competition because the Soviet Union got the first man in space.
They did.
Was it Yuri Gagarin?
Yuri Gagarin, yeah, and the first dog, Laika.
Exactly, but the first man on the moon, America.
Yes, exactly.
So America won the space race.
America
really.
ultimately won the space race, and the Soviet Union sort of backed away from it. But of course, once America won the space race, the last time man went to the moon was 1972. December 1972. I mean, that was 52 years ago. And we haven't been back since.
Why not?
Well, at one point,
it can only have got cheap.
at one point, the American public was spending, I think, 5 or 6% of GDP on NASA. It's now around 1% of GDP.
A lot of money.
In 1972, what did you have? You had the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
You had the oil crisis.
Yeah.
You had all of the Gulf crisis. Later, you had the Iranian Revolution. Basically, what you had was people starting to get very environmentally conscious. They didn't want to spend so much. There was the big anti-war movement. All of this stuff meant that actually a lot less funding went into NASA and associated programs.
And you can almost hear the protests from Just Stop Oil and the Green Party about this, can't you?
And yet, the technology that we discover through these sort of processes are going to be the solutions, although very often we've seen, of course, Just Stop Oil and the Green Party campaigning against things like nuclear power, campaigning against things that actually are low carbon.
If you look at the shonky piece of kit which landed on the moon, that can't have been very expensive.
It was very expensive.
Probably was then.
But think about it, Bev. You've got a phone sitting there on the table. That phone has more processing power than the entire Apollo program did.
Well, exactly. So I just don't understand why they haven't been back since. What do you mean? Like, this has all got cheaper and more accessible.
It has, but Bev, when they went to the moon, think about it.
I think Bev is sceptical about
No. When they went to the moon, they built this massive rocket called the Saturn V.
Yeah.
It was, up until today, the largest rocket that has ever flown on Earth. The only rocket to be bigger than that is Elon Musk's Starship, which is undergoing testing right now, and it's only done one successful test.
Right.
So we haven't built a big enough rocket ever since the 1960s and 70s. Why? Because it was incredibly expensive. Only governments could do it because they had to throw away the rocket at the end of the mission.
They were disposable.
They were all disposable.
And this is recyclable.
We all remember.
Amazing. The ultimate recycling, isn't it?
We all remember these these images of the Saturn V going up and the first stage falling away and crashing into the sea, and then it's lost forever. The next stage falling away and crashing into the sea, and it's lost forever. They didn't do anything with it, and therefore only governments would spend billions of dollars on this disposable rocket. So they couldn't keep going back to the moon in that way. They then tried to create a reusable spacecraft in the space shuttle, but that didn't work very well. It turned out that the space shuttle, every time it flew, it had to come back down to Earth, be disassembled completely, and then reassembled completely to be safe. And actually, it wasn't even that safe an aircraft.
I'm amazed Elon Musk hasn't got himself in there, isn't on this flight. Is he not fit enough?
He's said before,
because he's the richest man on the planet.
He's been asked many times, do you want to be on that first rocket to Mars? Do you want to be... He said, no. He doesn't want to be the first person to Mars. He doesn't want to be the first person doing this stuff. He wants to be running the company, and he thinks that if he were lost, because these are risky missions, if he were lost on one of these missions, then the whole thing might collapse. What he wants is to create a multi-planetary species. He wants humans to be spreading amongst the stars, and he thinks that if he were, if there's a 10% chance of failure, that's a pretty high-risk failure rate, and even if there was a 1% chance of failure, that would be an issue.
Tom, stay with us. We're going to talk now to the space and planetary scientist, Andy Lound, who joins us. Andy, how exciting is this for you?
Oh, it's very exciting. This is a breakthrough moment, really, in many ways, because we've got it's a private mission, which is in itself is more staggering than anything else. But it's also the fact that you've got this particular mission flying, which of course in the last few hours had flown the highest altitude since 1966 of a crewed mission, which in itself was quite fantastic. How far we've waited to actually do that. And now we're seeing really what is the next step on a long road to putting humans onto Mars and for making us a truly interplanetary species. And I think Elon Musk's goal for that is quite an interesting one. And you have to have these incremental steps to actually do it. And we're really making that step now. I mean, when you look, if you compare the interiors of that spacecraft and the types of spacesuits they're using to those of the Apollo era, you can actually see how far we've come with technology. Technology which is developing is pushing what we need to have down here on Earth. And I think there was a mention of especially things like green technology, things like that. Well, this is the type of space science that you need to get that kind of green technology.
You appear to be wearing something like a spacesuit. Are you auditioning to go up to space yourself?
Oh, yes, I'm auditioning every time to try and get an opportunity.
And is that a spacesuit you're wearing?
It's just a replica top, which looks like a spacesuit, yes, which I use sometimes, which is quite good fun. And got the background, and the background is the interior of the Dragon spacecraft.
Right.
That's what we just wanted to clarify. You didn't have an elaborate bedroom there made out like the inside of a rocket. It is actually green screen that you've superimposed the image onto.
That's correct, yes. I mean, this kind of thing I would do, actually, with an opportunity. But no, it is purely green screening at the moment.
Listen, Andy, how dangerous is it that we're seeing now and what might happen in the next few moments for these passengers?
Yeah, this is very dangerous. There are missions into space, although people seem to be getting the feeling that, oh, well, private companies are doing it now, it's quite routine and easy. It isn't. It's extremely dangerous. And this is why they're going through a very slow step-by-step procedure, a procedure that they're doing now, which, of course, they've rehearsed in extreme detail down here on Earth. This isn't like Buck Rogers or Star Trek, where people sort of do it on a whim. Everything is rehearsed, everything is trained for and practiced, and they're going through this routine under control, of course, of ground controllers who are monitoring everything. So it is very dangerous. You've got to get the pressurization right. There's always the danger of nitrogen narcosis, so you've got to make sure that doesn't happen. So you've got to make sure everything is done correctly, make sure the suits are correct. As you can see, the suits are expanding while they're wearing them, as the pressure inside the suit, of course, is greater than that on the outside within the cabin itself, because they have to equalize to a zero pressure for outside. So it is very dangerous. It's not to be taken lightly, and they must do exactly what they're told when they're told to do it. That's why you'll find that in previous missions where the governments have run them, a lot of astronauts are military people. That's simply because they're good at taking orders and doing what they're told.
And Andy, we were talking to Tom about perhaps when does this become more accessible? If this is successful, and we all wish it well, how realistic and feasible is it for people who are not billionaires to be travelling into space, perhaps in the next decade?
I think the next decade could be pushing it a little bit, but I think what we're seeing is with the technologies which are developing, is that, for instance, for commercial airlines will change very differently when you'll have aircraft which will fly above the atmosphere and arc around the Earth to land, say, London to Australia in about 40 minutes. And technically, you'll be flying above 50 miles or whichever limit you want to accept internationally, just over 60 miles. So you'll be technically flying into space to arc through, and that will become a commonplace thing. So by definition, everybody will be flying into space almost once they're doing these long-haul flights. That's going to be something that will come on stream, I think, within the next 10 to 15 years. But flying into space, places like the space station, I think there's going to be a little bit further ahead than that. But it will be a commonplace activity, because once you've got space stations or places on the moon which are operating with colonies, if you like, then they're going to have the people to do the same old jobs that are done down here on Earth. So it's an extension of Earth, if you like, out there. And then it will become common for people to travel there, apart from the tourism thing. I mean, if you look at it with commercial airline flights, at the beginning, you know, it was only the very wealthy that could fly in the 1930s. But by the 1960s, of course, virtually anybody could take a flight because the price had come down, because the availability was there and the technology was there. I think you made the point as well. The point was made about reusability, and that's the big game changer here, is reusability, because that brings the cost of spaceflight down incredibly.
Is it time we go back to the moon?
Say again, sorry?
Is it time to put another man or woman, I should say, on the moon?
Oh yes. Yes, it is. I mean, that's going to be happening very soon. Probably before 2030, we'll see another human walk on the surface of the moon. Certainly America with the Artemis program are going in that direction. China are pushing for that direction at the moment as well. And China are working with Russia as well on their moon base, which is going to be done in the South Polar region as well. And I think it's going to be quite important for Earth, because everybody comments about, oh, why are we wasting all this money going there? We're a species that has to spread out. We spread out from Africa, it appears, around the rest of the world. We spread down from Europe to the Americas.
Oh, we lost Andy.
Ah, lost in space.
You know, I feel like maybe I'm the only sane person in this room.
Does this not get you going?
Well, do you know what, Tom? We spend a lot of time talking about the fact we can't get the NHS to work. Here we go.
Looks like it's happening.
Take this live. Come on, Tom.
Take us through it. He's opening the hatch. Is he, Tom? Is he opening the hatch? Is he about?
It looks like he's about to open the hatch. This is the moment.
And that is a very old-fashioned way to open it. It's like he's winding up a car, isn't it?
It's like winding down a car window for people on the radio.
This is why it's cheaper than NASA.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought there would just be a button, Tom, and it would ping open. But he's literally winding down a window.
Well, I suppose if it's a button, there's the risk that something could go wrong.
Off.
If it's mechanical, that's a lot safer.
Right.
It's not broken, has it?
It's got stuck.
He stopped turning the handle now. He is holding on, and presumably that's... We're saying he. This could be Sarah Gillis, of course. He looks like he's about to twist open the hatch.
Pretty strong jolt to release that stiction.
It's going to require... We're hearing a strong jolt. So let's see if he's going to do it. Remember, this is the first walk in space, commercial walk in space ever.
Now unlatched.
Now, this must be the risk, the moment of high risk, Tom, you would think, when the pressure change occurs once this hatch is opened.
Any shift is a moment of major risk. It's also worth saying they've got further away from the Earth, over 700 kilometres from the Earth now, a remarkable distance.
And how he's feeling. Do we know for sure whether that is?
I've gotten to open the hatch, so when you go out as EV1, just like Jared here is EV1, that's typically the role for you is to open that hatch. And
that is Jared. Extra vehicular activity.
It's exciting. It is. It's very exciting.
So it's unlatched. It isn't open yet.
But we could be literally minutes away now, Tom, from them emerging into space.
Or disaster, let's be honest.
Yeah, let's be positive.
Well, this is Jared Isaacman, who's holding onto the hatch. I'm trying to be positive.
Yeah. 41, billionaire, made a lot of money, obviously made a lot of money, accompanied by a 30-year-old engineer
Sarah
on
Gillis.
SpaceX, Sarah Gillis, who is the technical wizard in here.
That's right. So they're going to be tethered. They call it an umbilical cord. It's 12 feet long. It will provide air and cooling into the suits from the cord. So that will stop them floating off into space, Tom.
It'll physically tether them to the spacecraft, but it's worth noting these suits are new. These suits have never been used on a spacewalk before. These are a SpaceX design. We're used to the big puffy suits from NASA. These are a lot more slimline. And in that, there is innovation, but also risk, as any innovation carries.
So the depressurization effectively begins once this capsule is, or once the hatch is opened. The airlock, there we go.
Now it's happening. He's bringing it, the hatch is opening. He's pulling it towards him.
So this will empty the cabin of air.
It's supposed to be pretty exciting for Jared because that...
The umbilical cord basically looks a bit like, if you're listening at home or you're listening on the radio, it's a bit like a tumble dryer pipe. You know, the pipe at the back of your tumble dryer. It looks a bit like that.
What is going through his mind?
I mean, this is extraordinary because all of the air inside there will be rushing out into the vacuum of space.
Yeah.
They will only be living now because they're wearing their spacesuits. In a sense, that is a bit of a spacewalk because they've just flooded the cabin, or the opposite of flooded the cabin, if you see what I mean. And they've opened that top hatch a very, very tiny way to allow that air to escape. Remarkable.
Looking out that tiny window there in the forward hatch, knowing he is going to have a much bigger window in just minutes.
It would be fascinating to see, and I'm sure that the mission control would be able to see his heart rate at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Racing, you would say. Well, possibly not. I imagine they do a huge amount of training to stay incredibly calm.
Now we can actually see the hatch coming down.
EV1, return to seat.
I wonder where he's going to put it.
And EV1 copies, transitioning back.
Will it float?
Yeah, well, they're in space.
They are in space.
They are in zero gravity. You can see they're sort of strapped into their seats. The Dragon capsule actually takes, I think, 6 to 8 seats, but it will have been modified for this mission.
We're actually watching that hatch. We're going to have you repeat the last operation.
Sounds like they're going to have them repeat them. One of the reasons we're doing that is just to kind of vent any of that residual atmosphere.
So they're being incredibly careful here about opening the hatch a very little way, because if they open it in a big swinging motion, all of the air gets sucked out, and perhaps they get sucked out too. That's a big moment of risk. So this is a very, very crucial moment to take very, very slowly.
And actually, Tom, I mean, this is like I said, I'm incredibly out of my depth here on this.
So we just
How does it occur to me that the capsule is spinning all the time? This capsule is spinning around the globe at 27,000 kilometers per hour.
Yeah, well, that's how orbit works. If you think about it, you could orbit the Earth at just a foot. If there was nothing on the Earth, you could orbit at just a foot above the Earth if you were travelling at the right speed. So the further you are away, you're basically just falling. So the International Space Station. If you're looking at the picture of the Earth on the screen, it would only be a tiny way above the Earth there on that scale, but it's moving so very quickly that it's actually falling faster than the speed at which the Earth moves, and that's how it orbits.
And if it's travelling at 27,000 kilometres an hour, that is 16,777 miles an hour. Extraordinary.
Extraordinary, but you've got no point of reference, so you don't feel like you're moving very quickly. And actually, if you think about it, the Earth is moving through space very, very quickly. We're orbiting the sun at about 16,000 miles an hour.
Right. They're clapping in control, in ground control. So the hatch is now opening. They're cheering and clapping. This is years of work, Tom. It's all coming.
What a remarkable sight. The hatch is fully open and it's swung down.
There is our first view of the forward hatch, wide open to space.
Wow, so they are now staring directly into space. Hatch is open. Space is literally now in their capsule.
And it is remarkable, given that they are 740 kilometres from Earth.
We are 38 minutes into
We are seeing live
footage.
footage.
Open on Dragon. First,
we're now looking out into space.
Looking out
through the helmet cam. This is remarkable. We didn't get any sort of live pictures like this throughout the Apollo program. Of course we didn't. We didn't
Hearing again,
live helmet cam.
Is this the walk now underway?
SpaceX copies, we're with you in your helmet cam.
It's like we're walking out with him. This is
if you're on the radio, if you're listening on the radio, they are literally now disappearing out the hatch, into space. How extraordinary.
And it must be said, the suit is holding up.
Well, that's a relief.
Of the first ever
Oh my God.
In many ways, the hard bit has been done, right? He is facing the elements of space.
I'm not sure the hard bit's been done yet, Tom. I can't lie. I'm on the edge of my seat for the minute here.
They are now delirious in ground control because you can hear them clapping and cheering.
Oh,
they are now out.
What a view.
What are they looking at?
What a view. That is the Earth. That is the pale blue dots.
You thought it was the moon. You thought it was the moon.
You asked the question.
Well, I was just saying because people are listening on the radio. So that we're now seeing. So that is like you see in a TV programme film. That's what he can see. That is amazing.
I mean, it's so remarkable, that.
So he's looking back out of the capsule, down to Earth. Now, OK, who's taking that shot?
That'll be one of the ones fixed to the capsule.
There's a fixed camera.
But no one has been this far from Earth since Apollo 17 in 1972. This man is the first person since the last 3 Apollo astronauts over 50 years ago to have had this view of Earth.
Well, that's good.
So what is he? So he's out.
Single-handed operations are fine. Static and with dynamic disturbance.
Elon Musk must be on the champagne, Tom.
Oh, I would reckon so.
They're not back down safely yet.
Yeah.
That's true. That will be some time before. Yeah. But the fact that this new suit that doesn't look like a Michelin man, that actually looks much more human. I mean, you can see the innovation that has gone into this mission, and it is working.
All of that safety of this man relies on the fabric, the technology that is encasing him right now.
And thinking about it, he's in this little capsule. It's not tied to anything. It's floating there. Well, it's travelling at quite a considerable speed there above the Earth. And not a penny of taxpayers' money.
Amazing. What exactly is he doing now? We haven't seen her yet. I assume she's going to walk too, Tom, or is it does just a billionaire get to walk in space?
We'll have to wait and see, but this is the big moment, right? Because there's a level of safety holding on to the capsule.
Yeah.
It's when he lets go of the capsule that will just feel so... I can't imagine what's going through his head. I mean, the training that will have gone into this will have been intense. But nothing can surely prepare you for letting go of the vehicle that is your only ride home.
We can see more of him now. It's like he's clambering off.
Have you ever stood at the top of a diving board above a swimming pool and sort of thought, do I jump?
I know.
Do I jump?
Yeah, or dive even.
Yes.
Even more terrifying. To see where the eyes of the world literally are on this man.
What's also amazing, if you think about it, is the fact that these images are being beamed down live to us. That's one of the most remarkable things, isn't it? Not the fact that this is happening, but the fact that we are watching it.
It's like we're there live, and as we say, you know, previous space missions, you'd have to wait weeks for the film to be delivered. Some of the best shots that we know of the launches of, and just of course, if we talk about the connection, it seems that there's been a connection problem. But of course, they are travelling at such a speed. The the footage will come in and out as this goes. So I expect that we'll reconnect any moment now.
That the capsule is travelling at a speed of 17,000 miles an hour. Unfathomable speed.
What if is he aware of that speed, though?
You wouldn't feel it. You wouldn't feel it because it's relative.
Yeah, exactly. So you wouldn't feel there's no resistance.
No.
So he wouldn't be aware of
there would be nothing to suggest your speed until you saw something whiz past you. And if it was stationary, it would feel like it was whizzing past you and you were stationary. We're getting into Einstein's theory of relativity here, but but here we go. We've got the pictures back.
You're going to devote your entire programme to this, aren't you?
Well, I think.
Does Emily know?
I think by the time we get to our programme, it seems like we probably will have him up in space.
Oh yeah.
Well, we will have that space.
It looks like he's there now.
Well, like I say, I'm much more concerned about them getting down safely than I am them getting out into the atmosphere as it is now. This to some extent has got to be not the easy part. But the important bit is to get them down.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you think about some of the disasters that there have been in space. If you think about the Challenger disaster, the space shuttle.
Didn't get into space, did it?
That one didn't get into space. The other space shuttle. Where there was, or was it? No, I think it was Challenger that broke up on re-entry. But there were two space shuttles that ended in disaster. One on the way up and one on the way down.
Yeah, one was when Reagan was president, I remember.
With the teacher on board.
The teacher.
Yeah.
That's right, female teacher. Yeah. He now looks like he's walking.
Still holding on to that capsule, though.
Yeah.
But you can see the umbilical cord just to the right of him.
SpaceX copies.
Now, this will be a proper spacewalk as soon as he lets go and is floating and is held only by that umbilical.
To return to the reach demonstration, we'll take a look at that with the live video.
I wonder how the conditions can be replicated to test the resistance of this suit down on Earth. You know, you wonder how realistic the conditions can be recreated in order to test the limits of this.
They must have been very, because they've got it right, Tom, so far.
They do. And I wonder if actually some of the testing might well have occurred on the International Space Station, which, of course, SpaceX astronauts have been to many times now. And SpaceX is one of the main providers of resources, but also now with the Crew Dragon capsule of getting astronauts up. There was a time, once the space shuttle was decommissioned and retired, when Americans had no launch capacity to get people up to the space station. The space station mainly paid for by America, but they had to rely on Russian rockets to get people up there, the Soyuz rockets. They had to rely on Soyuz for about a decade until Elon Musk came along with his Crew Dragon spacecraft. That was the first time that an American company could get people back onto a mainly American space station.
Elon Musk is a malign influence on the world with some of the stuff he does and says, but this is extraordinary, Tom, isn't it?
Yeah, it is extraordinary, and I think we do often look at Elon Musk for his ramblings on Twitter and some of the fruity things he says, but frankly, there's a lot of good in the world he does as well. And I think sometimes, if he only stuck to space, perhaps he'd be a more universally liked character. But of course, he can't help himself sometimes.
No, he can't.
Copy, we're returning those cones.
Well, I think we're handing over now to Emily, who is not quite as fascinated by space travel as her sparring partner, Tom. Yes, indeed.
But yeah, did you hear that? Absolutely correct. You have to allow your co-host to shine.
Oh, I don't know. I need to be reined in, I think.
Christmas card.
Why do that? Why do that? Well, it's been great, but we're going to leave you in the capable hands while we're lost in space or travelling in space with Tom and Emily. Extraordinary moment.
What a moment. What images. What live images. Well, it is now 12 o'clock. It is midday. This is Good Afternoon Britain with continued coverage of the first private spacewalk in our history. We are watching now the Polaris Dawn mission sent up by a Falcon 9 rocket this week to the furthest distance from Earth that any human has been since 1972.
And Tom, can you give me a short recap of what exactly we have seen here? What has this man achieved?
Well, this has been a remarkable mission. What we've had is, for the last day or so, this Dragon capsule getting to the position it is now, between 600 and 700 kilometres away from Earth, an incredible distance away from Earth. And indeed, we've had a very slow but methodical and reasoned sort of detachment of the hatch, readjustment of the pressure in the suits and in the capsule, so that everything goes right when we have the first private spacewalk that has ever occurred.
Wow. Yes, it all seems to be going at a glacial pace.
Yes.
To protect their safety. Is that what happens when you're in such an atmosphere?
Well, it'll all be doing little tests. It'll all be being measured. They'll be moving a little bit one way. Ground control will relay to them that everything is okay. One of the moments we saw that happening, of course, was when the hatch was opening. They had to open it by a fraction of an inch, just a tiny amount, because if they opened it the whole way and then there was any residual atmosphere in the vacuum of space, that would have rushed out and it could have, you know, yanked out some vital equipment. It could have sucked out the people from the capsules. They had to do it very, very slowly and methodically.
I want to know how much does this cost?
This is a private mission, so thankfully...
How much did this person pay to do such a thing?
It will have been hundreds of millions.
Wow. Maybe one day it'll be like Jared.
Well, this is the analogy that Elon Musk very often brings up, that in the early days of space flight, it was only the what we'd now call the billionaire class who could fly on a plane.
Yeah.
And then it took a few decades, and then most people were flying. Well, maybe not most people until, you know, the 1970s and 80s, perhaps, in developed countries. But even so, it is a process whereby this is much more affordable than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, only governments could do this. Private individuals couldn't. And in 10 years' time, it will be even cheaper.
How do you think some governments are feeling about this?
I wonder if some governments are feeling...
spaces.
Yeah, I wonder if some are feeling threatened. I think if I were Russia, I'd feel very annoyed at this, because, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, for about 10 years, the Americans had to rely on the Russians to get into space. Incredibly embarrassing for the world's richest country. Now the Americans can use their own private companies. They don't have to rely on dictators abroad. So I think the Americans are probably going to be pretty happy about this.
And who is this Mr. Isaacman?
He's an entrepreneur. He founded a payment system. But he's also an enthusiast for flying. I mean, he's got planes. He's always been an enthusiast for space, and so this was sort of a natural step for this sort of a wacky billionaire.
If you became a billionaire, you would definitely be up there, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
straight away.
I'd like to think I would.
First opportunity.
I'd like to think I would, but you know what? I mean, I don't. It's easy to imagine. Oh, of course I'd do. Of course I'd travel. You know, not connected to anything. Be hundreds of miles away from the Earth, further than anyone has been in more than half a century. And of course I'd just step out of the space vehicle, connected by nothing but an umbilical cord. Of course I would.
Get a bit scared.
I think I might.
A little bit frightened, but you might not make your way back.
I think I'd be mad if I wasn't a bit scared.
I think every person growing up has had some kind of dream of being an astronaut, of going into space. You have to have a strong stomach.
Oh, you certainly do.
You have to have a strong stomach. If you have motion sickness, then it's probably not the role for you.
I wonder if we're going to get more space obsession now with this generation, because there's suddenly adventure in space again. I feel like sort of in the 90s and the 2000s, there wasn't so much excitement in space. I mean, virtually everything in culture in the late 1960s, early 1970s was space. Everything was space-themed. The biggest movies were Star Wars and, you know, all the rest of it. But, of course, we then stopped going so far. We stopped going to the moon. We stopped that far sense of adventure. But we're sort of rediscovering that now.
I mean, there's always been a fascination with what's under the ocean.
Yes.
How deep that goes down. So there's some mad statistic that we've only explored a tiny
fraction.
You can only go so deep. So what's happening now?
Well, it looks like we're having the second foray up through through the hatch, we should be able to see an external shot very shortly.
Square characters, we want to do this.
Because this could be it. This could be... Here we go.
Oh, there must be
Really
nothing
cool to
like
see
that.
one of our own out there. That's awesome.
It's hard to contemplate sort of how alone someone must feel just sort of that far from Earth. Nothing supporting this craft. Floating there in... just so far away from home.
You know when you stand on the top of a mountain
Yeah.
and you can't see much life?
Yeah.
It must be that, but on steroids.
Yeah.
Just staring into the abyss. Just
And-
seeing the magnitude of what surrounds us.
And looking in one direction and seeing all of life. Everyone that has ever lived, everyone alive today, all the history of the world, everything that goes on, everything we see, talk about, everything in your field of view. And if you look the other way, nothing.
So how long does it take them to all come back down to Earth?
Well,
I don't know.
It really depends how many more orbits they'll do of the Earth. I mean, they won't be there for a long time. I mean, frankly, the capsule isn't big enough to have, you know, food for weeks and weeks. They'll be back down tomorrow, I would expect, perhaps even later today. But this is, again, a remarkable sight to remind everyone. This is the first private spacewalk, the furthest humans have been since 1972, and an entirely new spacesuit that is being worn by these private astronauts in what is a pretty remarkable test, a test of the feasibility of the private space sector, and we might be seeing a lot more of this in the years to come.
Oh, now he's done it. You know, many a billionaire will wish to follow.
Yeah.
I'm sure. So what could have gone wrong on the way up that didn't, thankfully?
Oh well, thankfully, they flew on a Falcon 9 rocket. Now these rockets have flown many times before. They're a very reliable rocket developed by SpaceX. They are the sort of workhorse of SpaceX. You now see, you know, multiple launches a week, sort of more than 50 launches a year of this rocket, getting satellites up into low Earth orbit, delivering resources to the International Space Station, delivering people to the International Space Station even, and in a sort of a slightly modified configuration, it can also be called the Falcon Heavy, when sort of 3 Falcon 9s are strapped together. This only required a Falcon 9. They'll be doing tests. They'll be coming in and out, and I think we used the analogy a little bit earlier of sort of, you know, standing on the edge of a diving board. Do you dive in? Do you not? At
That's
the
what
moment,
it looks like, doesn't it?
Yeah, no one has let go of the aircraft yet. The spacecraft. Of course, there is no air.
So they're sort of preparing mentally or physically, or both?
It will be both. They'll be measuring all sorts of instruments, but also, I mean, you can't think that this wouldn't have been a psychologically difficult.
What happened with those astronauts that were in space for far longer than they were intending to be?
So they're on board the International Space Station. They're actually going to be coming down on in a Dragon capsule, not this Dragon capsule, but SpaceX have said that they will send a Falcon 9 up, a Dragon capsule to connect to the International Space Station to then bring those astronauts down.
I mean, Tom, I've had the pleasure of reporting on a couple of rocket launches with you on this show, but I did not know that your knowledge of these things stretched this far. It's fantastic.
What
would I do without you on a moment like this?
I just really enjoy this sort of stuff, and
It's amazing.
the history behind it is incredible. It does make me think, you know, if the Cold War hadn't ended, or if the Soviets hadn't sort of been defeated in the space race, might we have had these sort of moments a lot earlier if the Americans and the Soviets had competed for many, many more years and more intensely? I mean, what more technology might we have? There's a television series called For All Mankind that imagines an alternative history where the Soviets landed on the moon first, and so the Americans redefine the space race, and they're thinking that the winner of the space race actually is the first to get to Mars, or to, you know, it just goes further and further and further. It feels that now that we don't have to rely on governments for this sort of innovation, that this is private competition between billionaires.
Well, the government's going to get involved with more and more regulation, I suppose.
Well, perhaps, but I think
can't
that
just get in a capsule and
I think governments can benefit from this too, though, because of course one of the biggest clients of SpaceX is NASA. So NASA uses SpaceX rockets all the time, whether it's for supplying the International Space Station or for getting up its own satellites into low Earth orbit, or indeed into geostationary orbit, much further away as well.
And you could see the Earth dark, and we flew into.
But it's not just about sort of the cost of these things. It's not just about the science and the advancements. One of the things that the first Apollo astronauts said when they went up to the moon, or even in missions that went less far, was that looking at the Earth from space, having a different perspective on just how fragile the planet looks, and seeing it there floating in space, the old adage of the pale blue dot. Some of those first Apollo astronauts said that, you know, their perspective on life completely changed after being up there in space.
And they gave away their billions.
And looking at the Earth. I don't think they ever had billions.
Oh, right.
But people become...
These astronauts.
Oh, these astronauts. Yeah,
Billionaire ones.
These billionaires. Well, perhaps they'll come down with a completely changed view of the Earth. There is this sort of effect that many astronauts say. You know, they go up, you know, they think they know themselves, but they see, you know, they're able to sort of hold out their hand and, like, sort of almost figuratively touch everything that has ever existed in humanity and think, wow, that's all there. It surely just gives you a different perspective on life, on how we live, on who we are.
Well, it's certainly a unique experience every time, I imagine. You notice something different. I wonder if our politicians around the world would comment on this.
I would imagine that we'd get a statement from at least the United States president on this mission.
Keir Starmer
once
might
it's
have a congratulatory note.
I don't know if Keir Starmer's a big fan of space. I mean, I hope he does, but I don't know if he will. I think certainly because this is a mission that launched from the United States of America, there are Americans on board. I think that American politicians will definitely comment on this. But of course, it's a huge story for the world as well, because this is opening a doorway that this won't be the first, this won't be the last private spacewalk, this won't be the last private space mission. This is a pioneering mission that will sort of, you know, toe the path, clear the path for the next lot.
You certainly realise how insignificant you are, perhaps, as a being. Or you might come back with a god complex. I don't know. I don't know.
It could go one
be
of two
humbling,
ways.
or it could be
Yeah.
it could be quite the opposite. But quite incredible to watch this and to see it so close up.
It is, and it does make you think that we sort of have missed out in recent decades. I mean, the last time man set foot on the moon was December 1972. For context, that's before Britain joined the European Economic Community. It's a very long time ago. I mean, it was one of the reasons that the NASA budget sort of was wound down a bit, and there were meant to be more Apollo missions after Apollo 17, but Apollo 17, I think it was Apollo 17, was the last mission to the moon. And one of the reasons why was that the Vietnam War was going on, and people were very angry with the amount that was being spent on all sorts of these things, and there was a sort of consolidation of public expenditure. But one of the remarkable things about this too is that we can see it. We've been able to have this live stream of this spacewalk as it has been tentatively going ahead.
And just explain to me what we can see on the screen here. We've got some kind of control room on the left, and then a picture of Earth.
Yeah, so this is a sort of digital representation of Earth. What you can see on the right of the image there is the path of the rocket as it sort of started to orbit, and then the secondary burn happened to get the capsule, which you could see on the far left of the screen, which is of course much further away from Earth than the low Earth orbit. That secondary burn took this capsule much further.
And this may be a stupid question, but would they be able to see any other planets?
Again, we will be sure to bring you views within the
I think not. I think if they looked really hard, I mean, if you think about it, how far away they are from Earth, they'd have about as good a view of another planet as we would, really. I mean, looking at the distances that we're looking at.
So we're talking about such vast distances.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, they might, if they really tried, they might be able to see Mars or Venus. But they and of course the sun and the moon would loom large as well. But if you think sort of, yes, this is the furthest anyone has been for over 50 years. I mean, it also sort of tells you the scale of the solar system, that it doesn't mean that they're much closer to any of our neighbouring planets.
There's lots of people getting in touch, amazed by what they're seeing. Andy says, Musk, moving from the industrial to the digital revolution of the space industry. Brilliant innovation and bravery. Fred says, who knew Tom was so multi-talented? A politics geek and a space geek.
No, it's just a geek, just a geek.
No.
Now, we will be dipping back into this historic spacewalk as we get more information on it. It seems that we have lost signal from the craft for the time being. Of course, it has been dipping in and out, given where it is and, frankly, where on the Earth it is currently above. That will depend on the signal that we can get. But there we go, the first